Hey, what's up? It's Cute What If. This side. Today we will be seeing What If Dekuverse Rise of the Multiverse. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. It was a typical day at UA High School. Class 1A was enjoying themselves in their classroom while their homeroom teacher, Aizawa, dozed off in his bright yellow sleeping bag. Not everyone was playing around. Shoto Todoroki, also known as Icy Hot, rested his head on his desk. Ochako Uraraka focused on finishing her homework. Ida Tenya lectured his classmates about proper classroom etiquette, and a certain green-haired boy was hunched over his desk, writing and muttering at an incredible speed. Midoriya Izuku had just witnessed a hero-villain fight on his way to school and was eager to document every detail he could about the hero, Kamui Woods. Amid this commotion, none of them noticed a shadow lurking at the back of the room. The shadow grinned, and within moments, a dark fog enveloped the classroom, causing Class 1A and Aizawa to vanish into the abyss. Aizawa, furious at being awakened from his nap, shouted about the consequences of their actions. Mina protested, claiming they had no idea what had happened, while Bakugo expressed his frustration with loud explosions from his hands. Izuku speculated that they had somehow fallen into a portal, suggesting it might be a powerful quirk since it was challenging to teleport so many people at once. He pondered the identity and intentions of whoever had brought them there, but before he could finish, Bakugo struck him on the head, demanding he stop mumbling. Aizawa attempted to regain control of the situation, urging everyone to assess their surroundings. Kirishima, excited, noted that they appeared to be in a theater, complete with a small stage, a large blank screen, and dark blue seats. The room was vast, with multiple doors lining the walls, and it was empty. Suddenly, the air shimmered, and several figures dropped to the ground. Among them were Nizu, All Might, the rest of the UA staff, the Big Three, Eri, Koda, the Wild Pussycats, Gran Torino, Hitoshi Shinso from General Studies, Mei Hatsum from the Support Course, Class 1B, Inko Midoriya, and the Bakugo family. Present Mike rushed toward Aizawa, inquiring about their location. Aizawa, still confused, admitted he had no answers. Nizu suggested they had fallen into someone's prank, but an unknown voice from the stage interrupted, asserting that it was no prank. The figure, shrouded in black smoke, revealed itself to be a girl. Bakugo, unable to contain himself, charged at her, but she effortlessly froze him in midair. She taunted him, suggesting it would be amusing to watch him struggle. Bakugo threatened her, but she retorted that he was merely a bully who picked on those weaker than him. As she spoke, an unseen force began to squeeze Bakugo, leaving him gasping for breath. Aizawa sprang into action, using his quirk, but it had no effect. He was bewildered as to why it wasn't working. The shadowy figure explained that she did not possess a quirk, which left Aizawa questioning how she was able to restrain Bakugo. She insisted that he deserved it for his threats, emphasizing that one should be prepared for the consequences of their actions. Aizawa argued that heroes were trained to save people, not to harm others, and urged her to release Bakugo before it was too late. Kirishima defended Bakugo, insisting he would never hurt an innocent person, but the shadow challenged that notion. Mitsuki, Bakugo's mother, pleaded for her son's release, expressing her fear for his life. Relenting, the shadow released Bakugo but warned Aizawa to keep him in check. Nizu then requested an introduction from the mysterious figure, who revealed her name was Lilith, offering the option of calling her Lith. "A pleasure to meet you all." Just as she said that, the shadows seemed to lift, and the woman became visible. The reason she had brought everyone there was to view the multiverse. Kaminari asked what a multiverse was. Lith explained that a multiverse is simply all the choices one never made. There exist infinite parallel dimensions for every realm, stemming from every single decision made. It was like the roots of plants, where every root branches into two, which further branch into another two. The only difference was that it was a never-ending cycle. Every decision leads to a different future. Lith continued, saying that every person has their own unique multiverse. One could think of it as being an anchor, where every decision shapes the future. She had the power to show them some of their futures. Nizu inquired if she had brought them there to show the multiverse of one person. Lilith confirmed that the person she chose was Izuku Midoriya. Izuku, feeling nervous under the gaze of his friends, raised his hands in front of him and stuttered, unsure of why he was chosen. He was relieved that Bakugo had passed out. He would have been furious to hear this. Lilith explained that she chose Izuku because his friends did not realize how fortunate they were to have him on their side in this multiverse. She wanted to show them how dire their situation would have been had All Might not come back for him that day. It was also for Izuku himself, as he seemed to be bordering on depression and insanity. She encouraged him to observe what she showed him, learn from it, and choose the path he wanted to take. Lilith expressed her pride in Izuku, seeing him as the anchor of the hero world now and in the future, shaping the destinies of those around him. She clapped her hands and announced that everyone should take their seats. All they needed to do was watch and learn, hoping they would realize how lucky they were. Everyone silently took their seats, with Kirishima dragging Bakugo towards one and propping him up. Mina complained about their quirks disappearing, and Uraraka gasped in surprise when she saw Toru, the invisible girl, who looked beautiful. Mineta, unable to contain himself, tried to reach for Toru, but the air around Lilith turned frosty. An unseen force pressed Mineta into the ground, and Lilith smiled at the rest of the heroes, saying that a pest had wormed its way into her theater. She quickly disposed of him, sending him back to UA, and declared that no one would speak of it moving forward. Suddenly, the air shimmered, and several villains, including All for One, Stain, and Jiren, fell into the space. The heroes gasped and jumped to their feet, preparing for a fight. Tamura growled as the villains readied their stances. All Might shouted at All for One, demanding to know how he escaped Tartarus. FO grinned, expressing his intent to finally succeed in killing All Might. Sid unsheathed his blades, and amidst the commotion, Lilith sighed and muttered to herself that she didn't get paid enough for this. Out loud, she commanded everyone to sit down immediately. No one expected her outburst, and they quickly complied. Lilith then explained to the villains why she had brought them there. She warned that there would be no fighting or killing, and if anyone tried anything, she would take action herself. They all chorused their understanding, with AFO intrigued by the multiverse theory, eager to see the version where he won. With a smile, Lilith thought that villains needed to be taught their place. She clapped her hands in excitement, ready to start. She laid out some ground rules. No fighting or killing, a panic room available if things became overwhelming, the ability to summon food and drinks by name, bathrooms to the right, and a playroom beside the panic room for Eri and Koda when the angst became too much. That was all. Now, without further ado, they would begin the exploration of the Dekuverse. Lilith took out a small remote from her pocket and pointed it at the blank screen. The screen turned black, and a bold white title appeared. Dekuverse. Katsuki, now awake, grew pale at the sight of the title. He exchanged a worried glance with Izuku, who looked equally apprehensive. They both understood the implications and were not looking forward to what was about to unfold. Lilith cursed under her breath, instructing Eri and Koda to go to the playroom, explaining that this was not suitable for children. Nizu inquired why Lilith seemed surprised, pointing out that she was the one showcasing these multiverses. Lilith sighed, explaining that while she could show parts of the multiverses, she had no control over which ones appeared, as they were random and interconnected. The Dekuverse began, displaying Izuku and Katsuki's classroom at Aldra Junior High. Their teachers stood at the podium with papers in hand, announcing that as third years, it was time for them to think about their futures. He tossed the papers into the air, grinning as the class erupted in excitement, showcasing their quirks. Aizawa frowned at the chaos, disapproving of the teacher's behavior. Katsuki, with his feet on his desk, sneered that he would not be stuck at the bottom like the rest of his classmates. His peers protested his arrogance, but their teacher reminded him that he wanted to attend UA, the prestigious national school known for its low acceptance rate. Katsuki boasted about acing the mock test, confident that he was the only one who could get into UA and surpass All Might to become the top hero. The teacher then mentioned Izuku's application to UA, prompting the class to laugh at him. Katsuki exploded Izuku's desk, taunting him about being quirkless and useless. Izuku, startled, scrambled back, explaining that he had always wanted to be a hero and could at least try. Katsuki shouted that a quirkless person like Izuku could never be a hero, expressing his anger with explosions. The class was shocked to learn that Izuku was quirkless, and All Might held his breath, fearing the secret of his quirk would be revealed. Izuku explained that he was a late bloomer and that his quirk had manifested on the day of the entrance exam. Aizawa realized that this was why Izuku had suffered so many injuries earlier in the year. Kirishima expressed concern for Izuku, questioning Katsuki's harsh treatment of him. Mitsuki Bakugu, visibly angry, confronted her son about his behavior. Lilith interrupted, reminding them that the multiverse was not over yet and fast-forwarded to the end of the school day. The bell rang, and Katsuki and his friends surrounded Izuku's desk. He snatched Izuku's notebook, mocking him for thinking it would make him a hero. He blasted the notebook out of the window, claiming he wanted the glory of being the only student from their school to make it into UA. He placed his hand on Izuku's shoulder, using his quirk to burn him through his uniform, while Izuku flinched, accustomed to Katsuki's bullying. Todoroki, noticing the burn on Izuku's shoulder, confronted Katsuki about the scars and burns Izuku had accumulated over time. Uraraka interrupted, urging Todoroki to look at the screen, revealing that Katsuki had just left the classroom, smirking as he suggested that Izuku should pray for a quirk in his next life and take a swan dive off the roof, laughing as he exited. The sound of a slap echoed through the theater as Inko Midoriya slapped Katsuki across the face, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had remained silent until now but could no longer contain her emotions. She questioned Katsuki's actions, expressing her disbelief at how he could treat his childhood friend so cruelly. She reminded him that Izuku had always looked up to him, even more than to All Might, and had followed him around as a child. Inko demanded to know how their friendship had deteriorated, wondering if it was because of Izuku's quirklessness. She questioned how it was Izuku's fault that he was born without a quirk and expressed her outrage at Katsuki's cruel words, asking how he could still aspire to be a hero after everything he had done. Do you honestly think that after bullying and emotionally tormenting an innocent child, my child, you can become a hero? She cried. Previously, Izuku reflected on Kachan's words, feeling a mix of sadness and determination. He decided to take his advice to heart, believing that perhaps this was the way to make Kachan happy. With a content smile on his face, he leaped off the roof. The scene faded, and the screen turned black. Silence enveloped the theater as the audience processed the intense moment. Eraserhead was the first to react, leaping from his seat. He used his scarf to bind All Might and pulled him closer, glaring intensely. He grabbed All Might's collar with both hands, expressing his frustration. He questioned how All Might could say such hurtful things to a child, wondering what kind of hero would crush a child's dreams. He pointed out the recklessness of leaving Izuku on a rooftop after a villain attack and challenged All Might's views on quirkless individuals. He demanded to know if All Might truly believed that those without quirks could not be heroes, emphasizing that he himself fought without a quirk and asked if that meant he wasn't seen as a hero. No one intervened during Aizawa's passionate outburst. The other heroes were taken aback by their number one hero's harsh words directed at a child. Izuku felt tears welling up, touched by Aizawa's. No one had ever stood up for him like that before, and he found warmth in the moment. Gran Torino, disappointed in his student, expressed his doubts about All Might's judgment. He reminded All Might that he had once been quirkless and understood the struggles faced by those without quirks. He criticized All Might for disregarding the plight of quirkless individuals and for shattering the dreams that had been nurtured in him by Nana. He stated that his disappointment was an understatement. Feeling ashamed, All Might looked down, unable to face the others. Shoto, curious, asked if All Might had been quirkless, wondering how he had obtained his quirk. Lilith explained that All Might's quirk was unique, capable of being passed down through generations, but only if the users were willing to share it. She revealed that All Might was the 8th user of the quirk. All Might protested, insisting that it was supposed to be a secret, but Lilith shrugged, noting that the truth would come out eventually. Shoto realized that this meant All Might had passed on his quirk, prompting Momo to wonder to whom it had been given. Class 1A collectively gasped, arriving at the same conclusion, Midoriya. Izuku blushed, confirming that he was indeed the ninth user. Uraraka remarked on how similar his power was to All Might's, while Lilith affirmed that All Might had given it to Izuku during the entrance exam without teaching him how to use it properly. She turned to Nizu, questioning why he had hired All Might as a teacher in the first place. Nizu sighed, admitting that it had been an order from the Hero Commission, though he now regretted agreeing to it. Stain, disillusioned with All Might, expressed his anger at having once admired him, feeling betrayed. Spinner questioned how they could be seen as villains when they had their own lines they would not cross, pointing out that All Might had crossed a significant line. FO then approached Izuku, offering to help him seek revenge on those who had mocked or hurt him. The heroes were outraged but understood Izuku's potential desire for vengeance. However, Izuku firmly declined, stating that if he wanted revenge, he would take it himself. His only goal was to be a hero, and nothing would change that. He reminded AFO that he was currently imprisoned and could not assist him. AFO conceded, and the heroes breathed a sigh of relief at Izuku's decision. Nizu finished his tea and stood up, addressing Izuku seriously. He asked if everything they had just witnessed had happened to him in real life. Izuku confirmed that it had. Nizu acknowledged that one of his staff and a student had treated Izuku unfairly and vowed to ensure they faced consequences for their actions, fulfilling his duty as a hero. He turned towards All Might, who was still wrapped in Aizawa's scarf. Nizu, the principal of a hero school, expressed his disapproval of one of his staff members discriminating against a child. Lilith found it amusing to hear Nizu's words, considering UA itself embodied discrimination. She was eager to confront him but reminded herself to be patient, knowing she had more than 10 chapters to guide the heroes into improvement. The wait would be worth it in the end. Nizu addressed Lilith, questioning if something in his speech amused her. She dismissed the notion, requesting to be called simply Lilith. Nizu then turned back to All Might, announcing that his teaching license would be confiscated until he could train himself to teach properly. He would also need to write a 1,000-page essay on the discrimination faced by quirkless individuals and those with weak quirks in Japan. Nizu emphasized that All Might, now retired and essentially quirkless, could help reduce this discrimination. He also mentioned that All Might owed an apology to Izuku and asked if there were any questions. All Might shook his head in response. Nizu then turned to Katsuki, expressing disappointment in allowing him into UA. He informed Katsuki that his actions towards Izuku were criminal offenses, and if reported, he could face significant consequences. Katsuki acknowledged his wrongdoing, feeling shaken after witnessing Izuku's distress. For the first time, he experienced guilt over the pain he had caused his childhood friend. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and did something he never thought he would do. He turned towards Izuku and bowed, expressing his sincere apologies for his past behavior. He admitted to being unkind and crossing lines he should never have crossed, stating that he did not expect forgiveness but wanted Izuku to know he regretted his actions. Izuku, overwhelmed with emotion, burst into tears. He had longed for this apology, never believing Kaken would ever acknowledge his hurt. Seeing Katsuki bowing and apologizing made him realize how deeply affected he was. He jumped into Katsuki's arms, expressing his pain and frustration over the years of hurt he had endured. After Izuku calmed down, he whispered a small apology and sat back down. Katsuki, still determined to be the #1 hero, made it clear he wouldn't repeat such actions. Nizu acknowledged Katsuki's willingness to change but warned him that he would face consequences, including the confiscation of his provisional license and mandatory sessions with a mentor. He would also need to complete community work and the same essay as All Might. Aizawa then addressed Izuku, encouraging him by stating that he could still become a hero without a quirk, but it would require 10 times more effort. He emphasized that true heroism comes from heart and spirit, not from quirks. His words resonated with the rest of the UA staff and heroes, who smiled and applauded, inspired by his message. Class 1A expressed their gratitude, jumping on Aizawa in appreciation. Lilith smiled, pleased that at least one of them was on the right track. She brought Eri and Koda back from the playroom, ready to move on to the next multiverse. The heroes and villains settled into their seats, selecting their food and drinks. Midnight chose an orange-flavored beverage, while Eraserhead and Detective Tsukichi enjoyed their black coffee. Nizu sipped his tea, Dobby examined his Scotch whiskey, and All for One savored a glass of bourbon. The League of Villains munched on various snacks, while Class 1A and 1B shared an assortment of chips, juice, pizza, burgers, and fries. All Might enjoyed a latte, and the UA staff indulged in Japanese snacks. Endeavor remained stoic, arms folded, while the Todoroki family shared a cheese pizza. The Hawks munched on a basket of chicken nuggets. Toga excitedly called out the name of her chosen drink. All heads in the theater turned toward her in astonishment, which soon transformed into horror as a blood-red drink appeared in front of her. Toga's face lit up as she tentatively took a sip. Her smile faded, and her eyebrows scrunched together in confusion. She wondered why it was raspberry juice. The theater collectively sighed in relief. Lilith burst into laughter, leaning against her seat, thoroughly entertained by the reactions around her. She continued to giggle, oblivious to the glares directed at her from all sides. Once she calmed down, she manifested frozen apple candies and offered them to Eri and Koda, who lit up in excitement. They both expressed their gratitude enthusiastically. Lilith, still grinning, suggested they start the show and pressed the remote, causing the screen to go black. The screen displayed the title, Dekuverse, 862, followed by the words, "Thank you for never caring about society." The countdown began. 5. The scene opened to a 23-year-old Izuku making breakfast in a kitchen, humming a tune as he flipped pancakes. He stood at 6 feet tall, with bulging muscles visible in his half-sleeved navy blue V-neck and black denim jeans. His hair was styled in a messy bun, with a few stray strands framing his freckled face. An ear piercing on his right ear added to his bad boy vibe. Midnight playfully wolf-whistled, impressed by Izuku's appearance. The girls present in the theater mentally agreed with her, some even blushing. Uraraka complimented him, holding a tissue to her nose, which had started to bleed. Tokoyami noted that he never expected to see this side of Midoriya. Izuku blushed and sank back into his seat, unsure how to respond to the compliments. Inko, with tears in her eyes, expressed her pride in her son growing up. Suddenly, a 15-year-old girl burst into the kitchen, hugging Izuku and greeting him cheerfully. Izuku smiled and asked if she was ready for the day. The girl, eager and confident, declared that she was going to ace the entrance exam. She had striking red eyes and bluish-silver hair tied in a high ponytail, with a small off-white horn on her forehead. Her outfit consisted of a black crop tank top and comfortable gray trousers adorned with vine tattoos. Class 1A gasped in unison upon seeing Eri. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Izuku, who also blushed at the moment. Eri expressed her disbelief that Deku was her dad, and Uraraka agreed that he would make a wonderful father. Aizawa, determined, resolved to sign the official adoption papers once they returned to UA, feeling a strong bond with Eri. Eri nostalgically reflected on her journey, amazed that she was going to UA. She once feared being torn apart but now aimed to use her quirk to help others and become a hero. Izuku encouraged her, expressing his pride and support, assuring her that he would always have her back. After breakfast, they got into a car, and Izuku drove toward UA. Momo asked Eri about her past, leading to a tense moment as Eri hesitated. Aizawa stepped in to explain that Eri had been experimented on by Overhaul, who had used her blood to create cork-erasing bullets. The students reacted with horror, outraged by the revelation. Izuku arrived at the gates of UA and kissed Eri's forehead, wishing her luck as she ran inside. He stretched and prepared for work, driving to a large building near UA and parking in the staff lot. He made his way through the maze of rooms and hallways until he reached a door. After scanning his ID, a metallic voice asked for the password, to which he confidently replied, "Rainbow kittens on sprinkle clouds." The theater erupted in laughter, with Kaminari exclaiming how awesome that password was. Mina smiled confidently, ready to take on the challenge. She was determined to make Midoriya the most fashionable boy in Class 1A. With a firm handshake and a nod of mutual respect, she and Lilith embarked on their mission, fully committed to its success. The heroes felt a sense of pride as they watched their sweet cinnamon roll grow into a fine young man, thriving as a support technician. They eagerly anticipated more multiverse stories like this one. In contrast, most of the villains, excluding AFO and Toga, were visibly annoyed. They found the sappy moments tedious and were frustrated by the lack of insight into the heroes' weaknesses. Being forced to endure the heroes' happiness only fueled their desire to escape the theater and return to their own lives. Fo, however, was intrigued by the next verse. He had closely observed Izuku Midoriya's life in the first verse and realized how easily he could have turned one of UA's major powerhouses into a villain. Had Midoriya chosen that path, he would have posed a significant threat to the heroes. AFO recalled Lilith mentioning that the multiverse was a web of realities not chosen, which led him to believe they would soon witness Izuku Midoriya as a villain. He sensed the boy's untapped potential and eagerly anticipated the chaos he could unleash. Toga relished every moment of the verse. She had developed a crush on Izuku the moment she laid eyes on him, and exploring different facets of his character was thrilling. She imagined how much more she would adore him if he were a darker version of himself. Tamura, growing increasingly impatient, expressed his frustration. He hunched over in his seat, scratching at his neck, and complained about the lovey-dovey scenes. Lilith, with a smirk, teased him about wanting to see the hero in training transform into a villain, a heartless monster capable of causing destruction without remorse. Tamura paused, intrigued by the idea of Izuku becoming a villain. Lilith confirmed that they would be surprised by the power he could wield as a villain. The villains, now fully engaged, straightened in their seats, eager to see the boy who resembled All Might in every way take on a darker role. AFO felt satisfied that his prediction was correct and prepared to pay close attention to the next verse, hoping to discover something that could lead Izuku down a villainous path. Toga's excitement grew at the thought of Izuku as a villain, imagining him in a fierce battle. Meanwhile, the heroes were horrified by the possibility of one of their brightest and kindest students choosing to become a villain. Izuku himself trembled in his seat, acutely aware of how close he had come to that fate. He dreaded witnessing what might have happened had he taken that darker path. Might, filled with outrage, defended Izuku, insisting that he would never choose the path of evil. He believed in the boy's heart of gold and couldn't fathom his successor turning to darkness. Lilith, however, challenged All Might's perspective, reminding him of the day he crushed Izuku's dreams on the rooftop. She pointed out that for 10 years, Izuku had clung to All Might's words, "Anyone can be a hero." When All Might told him he couldn't be a hero, he shattered Izuku's last thread of hope. Lilith pressed All Might to consider what he expected Izuku to do after such a blow. All Might fell silent, grappling with the weight of Lilith's words. He realized the truth in her statement. He had unknowingly pushed Izuku to the brink. The only person he could hold accountable was himself. Class 1A, however, refused to accept the idea that Izuku could ever become a villain. Bakugo scoffed, asserting that the nerd couldn't harm a fly, while Ochako echoed his sentiment, declaring that Deku would always be a hero. Lilith shrugged, suggesting they would find out by watching the next verse, and pointed the remote at the screen. The title appeared, Dekuverse. You said I couldn't become a hero. So I didn't. The countdown began. Dekuverse start. The screen displayed the fight between Class 1A and Tamura Shigaraki during the USJ attack. This time, another figure stood beside Tamura, dressed in a black hoodie and ripped jeans, with a mask obscuring his face. He appeared bored, jotting down notes in a notebook as he observed Class 1A. Kurojairi returned to Tamura's side, informing him that one student had escaped. The boy paused his writing and stared at Kurojairi, while Tamura expressed his frustration. He then noticed 3 students spying on him from the side of the shipwreck zone. Toru, incredulous, pointed out the students, asking if they were Azui, Shinso, and Mineta. Izuku and Azui shuddered, recalling a moment when they had been in grave danger. In a flash, Tamura reached the 3 students, placing his hand on Azui's face. The girls of Class 1A cried out in alarm. Kirishima, concerned, asked Azui if that had really happened. Tsuyu confirmed it, explaining that Aizawa-sensei and Midoriya had saved her. Tamura chuckled, acknowledging Eraserhead's efforts to prevent Azui from being harmed, even as he was overwhelmed by the Nomu. The Nomu slammed Eraserhead into the ground, causing his quirk to falter. In a matter of moments, Azui was lost, leaving the other two students paralyzed with fear. Just then, the front gates burst open, and All Might entered the USJ, shoving the Nomu off Eraserhead and rescuing the students. He swiftly moved them away from danger, turning to face the villains. Ochako screamed Azui's name and hugged her tightly, joined by the other girls from Class 1A, all of them in tears. Azui, Shinso, and Izuku trembled, realizing how close they had come to a tragic fate. Shinso, for once, felt relieved that he had not been selected for the hero course before the sports festival. The atmosphere among the heroes was somber. No one appreciated what they had just witnessed. Class 1B, particularly Minoma, felt shaken. They had previously envied Class 1A for surviving a villain attack, but now, having seen the reality of the situation, they recognized how foolish their rivalry had been. Guilt washed over them for their hostility towards Class 1A, who had narrowly escaped a dire fate. All Might declared boldly that there was no need to fear, as he was present to protect them. Lilith sighed, expressing her disdain for his catchphrase, pointing out that his presence alone would not solve their problems. The boy in black laughed at All Might's declaration, mocking him for being too late to save one of his students. Tamura smirked, enjoying the moment as All Might's composure wavered. The villains in the theater erupted in laughter, with Toga rolling on the floor, thoroughly entertained by the exchange. Tamura lamented that their raid could have gone better. All Might's face paled as he whispered, asking which student had been lost. The boy continued to taunt him, suggesting that All Might's focus on minor criminals had cost him the chance to save his students. All Might's eyes widened in realization, struggling to maintain his smile as the boy's words struck a nerve. Toga found amusement in All Might's expression, relishing the change from his usual demeanor. Shinso, unable to contain his emotions, shouted in distress about Azui's fate, pleading with All Might to ensure the villains did not escape. Anger surged through All Might as he vowed that the villains would pay for their actions, launching himself at Tamura. Tamura commanded the Nomu to block All Might's attacks. As they fought, Tamura boasted about the Nomu's abilities. Kurojairi intervened, creating portals to assist the Nomu in its assault. However, 3 students sprang into action. Shoto froze part of the Nomu, giving All Might a chance to break free, while Katsuki subdued Kurojairi. Kirishima attempted to confront the masked boy but underestimated him, leading to a swift counterattack that left him on the ground, a gun pointed at his forehead. The atmosphere in the central plaza shifted dramatically as the villain pet his weapon, causing All Might to freeze and Katsuki and Shoto to widen their eyes in shock. Class 1A gasped in horror at the sight of the gun, fearing for their classmates' safety. Katsuki, determined, threatened the villain, demanding he drop the weapon while keeping Kurojairi pinned down with a small explosion as a warning. Aizawa, glaring at Katsuki, admonished him for provoking a villain with a hostage. Katsuki protested, insisting he was not at fault, but even he felt the weight of Aizawa's intense gaze. The villain, confused by Katsuki's actions, questioned why he would want to save Kurojairi, suggesting it was out of character for him. Katsuki retorted defiantly, asserting that a villain could never understand his motivations. Now they needed to let go of the situation. Kirishima, with a smile, dodged a punch from Bakugo, who was clearly frustrated. Kirishima remarked on Bakugo's past behavior, noting that despite their differences, it was nice to see that Bakugo cared. Kirishima then launched into a detailed description of Bakugo, highlighting his explosive quirk and the risks associated with it. He pointed out Bakugo's personality, which mirrored his powers, and how he often looked down on those he deemed weaker. Kirishima also mentioned Bakugo's aspirations to be a hero, which felt ironic given his past bullying of a classmate. He criticized the standards of UA, suggesting that Bakugo's past misdeeds had been overlooked due to his powerful quirk. Lilith found the description amusing, laughing at Bakugo's expense. Nizu, however, defended the school's admission process, stating that Bakugo had no criminal record. Lilith dismissed this, arguing that schools would not tarnish their reputations by reporting a promising student's misbehavior. Nizu contemplated investigating Bakugo's previous schools to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Bakugo, caught off guard by a new arrival, questioned the identity of the mysterious figure. Kirishima, concerned, asked if the newcomer was indeed who he thought it was. The masked figure revealed himself, and Bakugo's shock was palpable. The person had familiar features, and Bakugo's realization hit hard. The figure, now known as Izuku, had returned, and with him came a wave of memories and emotions. Tamura, another figure in the room, smirked at the situation, referring to Izuku as his sidekick. Toga, excited by the chaos, expressed a desire to engage in a more violent way, but Izuku declined, feeling uneasy about the villain's intentions. AFO, observing the unfolding drama, mused about Izuku's choices and his refusal to accept a quirk. Izuku explained that he wanted to prove his worth without relying on powers, aiming to change society's views on quirkless individuals. When questioned about his alignment with villains, Izuku's response was filled with conviction. He revealed that the villains had accepted him when others had not, providing him with a sense of belonging and purpose. He declared his intention to dismantle the hero society that had once rejected him, envisioning a world where everyone was treated equally, regardless of their quirks. Jiro, confused by the villains' actions, questioned their motivations for helping Izuku. Dobby responded, explaining that many of them had once aspired to be heroes but had been hurt by those they once admired. He emphasized that the actions of heroes and society often pushed innocent individuals toward villainy. Privileged individuals could never understand the struggles faced by others. At some point in their lives, everyone has experienced bullying, emotional distress, or the disappointment of their own parents due to their differences. Spinner reflected on his past, recalling the times he was bullied for having a mutant-type quirk. He expressed that if the privileged couldn't comprehend what drives someone to villainy, then they didn't deserve to be heroes. The League of Villains was their sanctuary, a place where they didn't have to pretend to be normal. It was where they felt safe and free, and they were determined to protect that refuge. Toga leaned into Dobby, clutching his jacket, finding comfort in his presence. He had known her longer than anyone else, and she felt like family to him. The students listened in silence, feeling ashamed after hearing the villain's words. They had witnessed their friends snap and join the other side after being pushed too far by Bakugo and All Might. It dawned on them that villains were not simply embodiments of evil. They were individuals who had been let down and betrayed by society, rebelling in the only way they knew how. While it didn't excuse their actions, it provided some understanding of their motivations. They turned their attention back to the screen. Kurogiri reminded them that other heroes could arrive at any moment. Tamura commanded the Nomu to attack All Might, while Izuku managed to shoot Kirishima in the leg through a small opening in his hardening. Kirishima's cry of pain prompted Katsuki and Shoto to spring into action. Shoto used his quirk to push Izuku away from Kirishima, while Katsuki carefully dragged him out of harm's way. All Might and the Nomu engaged in a fierce battle, exchanging powerful blows until All Might emerged victorious, sending the Nomu crashing out of the USJ building. Izuku took notes on the fight, muttering to himself. Afterward, he noticed smoke emanating from All Might and alerted Tamura. Just as Tamura approached All Might, he was shot in the hand. The heroes from UA had arrived. Snipe fired additional shots at Tamura's arms and legs, and Kurogiri warped them all away. Izuku apologized to Kirishima for the incident, and Kirishima reassured him that it wasn't his fault, sharing a fist bump in camaraderie. Aizawa stood up, glaring at Bakugo and All Might, expressing his disappointment in their actions and demanding accountability. Both heroes muttered apologies, fearing Aizawa's wrath. Azui expressed her gratitude to Izuku for saving her life, and he smiled, happy to help. Toga, disappointed that the scene had ended, lamented wanting to see Izuku in a more intense situation. Lilith reassured her that there would be more opportunities, explaining that Izuku had far more scenarios as a villain than as a hero, with the ratios reflecting that. Izuku frowned at the statistics, feeling uneasy about the villain count, but reminded himself that he was a hero in the present, and that was what mattered. Lilith smiled and suggested they move on to the next segment. Nizu reflected on the presented ratios, acknowledging that they stemmed from the failures of society. He was curious about what they would witness next, wondering if Izuku could change the current state of affairs. All for one, intrigued, agreed and invited Nizu to play chess with him during their time in Tartarus, a prospect that sent shivers down the spines of the UA teachers, who were well aware of Nizu's cunning nature. Kendo raised her hand, seeking clarification on Nizu's earlier comment, but Nizu admitted he wasn't entirely sure yet, promising to explain once he had more certainty. Kendo settled back in her seat, while Lilith stifled a laugh, knowing the thoughts running through everyone's minds. With everyone eager for the next verse, Lilith smiled and prepared to continue the story. Dekuverse, 039. It starts with your death. Starting in 5, Lilith informed Eri and Koda that they needed to go play. Koda took Eri's hand and led her to the playroom. Dekuverse start. A boy stood on the edge of the roof of a 6-story building, facing the Hero Commission headquarters with his back to the screen. He wore a full-sleeve black combat suit and boots. A man with wings landed on the roof behind the boy. He acknowledged the situation with surprise. Class 1A and 1B gasped in recognition of Hawks. Kigo raised an eyebrow and sat up straight. The boy turned around, revealing his emotionless, dull green eyes. He confirmed his intentions, challenging the man. Denki exclaimed Midoriya's name in disbelief. Ochako gasped in horror at the boy's expression, questioning why he appeared so devoid of emotion. The man agreed that his consciousness urged him to intervene, but for once, he wanted to follow his heart. Shoto looked at Kigo, confused about the conversation. Kigo shrugged, admitting he was just as puzzled. He wanted to focus on what would happen next. The boy raised an eyebrow, his freckles shifting with the movement, and questioned Kigo about what his heart said. Kigo pondered how the boy knew his name, realizing only a few could have that knowledge. Kigo Takami, pro-hero Hawks, locked eyes with the boy, his gaze revealing the pain and torment he had endured. He expressed a desire for justice against those who had wronged them. Endeavor demanded to know the meaning of Hawk's words. Kigo's eyes widened in understanding and horror as he turned toward Lilith, urging her to shut down the situation. He realized the implications of the emotionless boy and the commission headquarters. Lilith explained that it was impossible to stop a verse once it had begun. The entire theater was captivated by Hawk's serious demeanor, realizing a pro-hero sought justice. Hawks clarified that he did not seek revenge for himself but for the innocent children who had suffered. He had never felt this way before, but the boy's experiences had opened his eyes to the truth. He vowed to help Izuku, promising that no child should endure such pain. The Todoroki family tensed at the mention of their eldest son. Kigo whispered to himself, confirming his suspicions, and held his head in his hands. Aizawa looked at Hawks, puzzled by his revelation. Dobby frowned, but only Shoto noticed. Izuku assured his friend that he would keep his promise. He expressed amusement at the situation, questioning if Hawks would assist him. Kigo replied that Izuku was on his own but promised to minimize civilian casualties and encourage other heroes to do the same. Present might question the term, casualties, seeking clarity on the unfolding events. Aizawa frowned, concerned. Izuku smiled, and Kigo encouraged him to fight with peace of mind, wishing him victory. Izuku smirked, stating that even if he failed, his actions would change Japan's fate forever. He pointed out the irony of a pro-hero encouraging a villain to take action. The heroes reacted in shock, realizing the implications of Izuku's intentions. Endeavor glared at Hawks, questioning his hero status. Chapter end. Previously, Lilith shrugged, stating that the truth is always bitter. 13 expressed disbelief that children were trained to kill and apologized to Hawks for not noticing. Kigo scoffed, explaining that even if 13 had noticed, the Commission's control over their agents would have prevented any action. Ochako stood up, insisting they could change the situation. Kigo challenged her, stating they lacked proof and that the Commission would dismiss their arguments. He reminded her that they were students, and no one would listen. Ochako stammered, trying to argue. Kigo dismissed her concerns, asserting that he was fine and that people like him were necessary. He explained that sometimes, Taking drastic measures was the only way to prevent further harm. He warned that even if heroes rebelled, the Commission would label them as villains. All Might, uncertain, suggested that his influence could make a difference. Lilith shrugged, indicating that while it could, All Might's retirement meant the Commission might not listen or could silence him. Denki protested, claiming All Might was the symbol of peace and couldn't be harmed. Kigo countered, explaining that many heroes had been silenced by the Commission, framed as villain attacks. All Might was vulnerable, and eliminating him would be easy. Lilith added that All Might was merely a symbol created to reassure the public, lacking political power. Aizawa expressed frustration, realizing that without undeniable proof, going public would damage people's trust in heroes. Lilith confirmed that, for now, they were powerless but suggested they might find inspiration in the remaining verses. She proposed a break for a meme slideshow. The students of UA erupted in excitement at the mention of memes. Lilith smirked, confirming she had plenty to share. How about everyone gather Izuku, Eri, and Kota before we start? If anyone needs to use the restroom, it's that way. The audience nodded and took a short break. Mandalay and Aizawa went to the playroom to get Eri and Kota, while Uraraka and Ida went to fetch Izuku. When he emerged from the panic room, Izuku appeared calmer and looked better than before. He nodded towards Lilith and Hawks and took his seat. Once everyone settled down, the slideshow began. Eri excitedly pointed at the screen, recognizing herself and Izuku. Izuku smiled in response. Mina exclaimed how cute Eri looked, and the rest of the audience agreed. Mirio noted that Eri seemed to be having a lot of fun. Eri turned to Aizawa, expressing her desire to visit the beach with Izuku, Mirio, Present Mike, and everyone else. Aizawa smiled at her enthusiasm, and Present Mike chuckled. Aizawa explained that the beach was a place with a lot of water, and they could indeed go there. Eri's eyes lit up with joy as she thanked Aizawa, calling him Dadzawa. Aizawa affectionately ruffled her hair. As the slideshow continued, Kirishima protested that the image didn't accurately represent them. The villains shot him a knowing look. Sato remarked that while he understood Bakugo and somewhat Izuku, seeing Kirishima and Todoroki like that was a first for him. Katsuki challenged Kirishima, questioning what he meant. Tsuyu agreed with Kirishima's sentiment. Kurojairi shook his head, commenting on the lack of class among heroes nowadays. Midnight laughed, pointing out Dobby's confused expression in the image. Magna found it amusing that they looked like they were about to confront someone. Izuku defended the image, insisting it wasn't that bad. Toru noted that Izuku did have a fierce expression when he fought. Kaminari eagerly called for the next slide. Laughter erupted from the students, with a few heroes joining in. Toga questioned how they managed to get that picture since Shigaraki had them delete theirs. Lilith smirked, claiming that a magician never reveals her secrets. Jaira was surprised to learn that they actually wore those shirts. Dobby explained that they were bored and didn't plan. World domination all day. Jaira shrugged, suggesting that was kind of what she thought. Tamura grumbled about missing the chance to wear a favorite shirt on the day they attacked the USJ, which caused a collective sweat drop from the heroes and students. Lilith laughed and moved on to the next slide. Mina laughed, exclaiming how cute Tokoyami looked. Fumikage protested, demanding to know where they got that picture. Dark Shadow agreed, reminiscing about how small they were back then. Shoji reassured Dark Shadow that he looked cute too, prompting laughter from both villains and heroes. Shoto shook his head, recalling that this had indeed happened during the provisional license exam. Izuku blushed in embarrassment as Endeavor questioned the meaning behind the images. Ectoplasm noted that he could indeed hear Endeavor. Ragdoll expressed concern about the danger of the situation. Kigo smiled brightly, sharing that it was one of the most fun moments he had experienced. Jairu complimented Kigo's coolness, feeling a bit jealous. Kigo laughed along with the other teachers, while Dobby blushed at the picture. Stain glared at Present Mike, calling him another fake hero. Aizawa snarled, readying his capture weapon, his eyes glowing red and hair rising. He warned Stain to dare to lay a hand on Mike, promising dire consequences. Mike hid a smile behind his hand, thinking Aizawa looked like a cat. Class 1A rolled on the ground with laughter, And Mina declared she would save the picture as her wallpaper because it was so funny. The audience turned their attention to Tamura, who expressed surprise that Eraserhead was the only hero he respected. Momo commented that she would never hear Jingle Bells the same way again. Fuyumi sighed, recalling a night she wanted to forget, as the three of them had made quite a mess. Shoto and Natsuo smiled sheepishly, while Dobby gazed at the screen with a nostalgic look. Izuku recalled a moment when they were heading to Endeavor's agency, shocked at how quickly someone had silenced Katsuki. Denki expressed respect for that person. Katsuki questioned what Denki said, while Kendo sympathized with Izuku. Toga sighed, asking not to be started on the topic. Tamura laughed, and Class 1A joined in. Jairu humorously declared that it was a new class of foolishness, earning Dobby a disapproving look from the audience. Dobby glanced around, questioning why he couldn't share that opinion. Midnight blushed and looked away, prompting Aizawa to sigh. Kirishima playfully mocked Bakugo's horrified expression. Nijire noted the similarities, realizing that the leader of the League of Villains had once been like Eri. Mirio stumbled over his words, while Nizu reassured him that no one was blaming him. Unfortunately, this was a consequence of heroes failing. Tamura and Eri exchanged glances, and he whispered to her that it wasn't her fault. Tears filled Eri's eyes as she began to cry. Despite everyone telling her it wasn't her fault, they had never truly understood her pain. Hearing those words from someone who had experienced similar struggles broke the dam of her emotions. She cried for herself and for Tamura, mourning the life he could have had, knowing he would never experience the joy she had with the heroes. Even at 7, she had grown up too quickly and understood far too much. After 5 minutes of crying, the heroes attempted to comfort her, but nothing seemed to work. Tamura stood up and approached Eri, despite Aizawa's warning growl. He showed his hands in surrender as he neared her and gently ruffled her hair, whispering that it was enough. Eri looked up at him, tears still in her eyes, but he offered her a slight smile. Her cries turned into sniffles and then stopped entirely. She wiped her face and beamed at Tamura, who was taken aback by her smile. It had been a long time since someone had smiled at him like that, and for some reason, he felt a sense of satisfaction at having severed Overhaul's hands. Returning to his seat, Tamura noticed the confused expressions of the heroes around him. He remarked that just because he was a villain didn't mean he didn't know how to comfort a child. Eri laughed softly as Aizawa held her face in his hands, using a tissue to wipe her cheeks clean. Hound Dog observed the exchange between Tamura and Eri closely, concluding that the villain had helped her overcome one of her most serious traumas. To think a villain could accomplish in mere minutes what he had been attempting for months was truly surprising. Help often arrives in the most unexpected ways. Lilith smiled slyly and asked Izuku if he had ever dreamed of taking over Japan. Izuku, taken aback, insisted that he would never think such a thing. Tamura, confused, remarked that there was nothing wrong with such thoughts, as he often dreamed of defeating heroes. Izuku pointed out that only villains think like that, to which Lilith added that revolutionaries might think similarly. When Izuku inquired about her meaning, Lilith simply smiled mysteriously and promised he would find out soon. The screen displayed the battle in the Kamino ward. All for One had nearly wiped out the heroes at that location, leaving destruction in his wake as he floated above the fallen heroes. Ida recognized the scene as the Kamino ward incident. All for One acknowledged Best Jeanist for managing to save many heroes just in time, but noted that they had still suffered significant damage. Despite their efforts, Best Jeanist and Endeavor were easily overpowered. As the two heroes lay defeated, All for One activated Kurogiri's quirk, creating a warp gate. All Might arrived just as the League of Villains escaped through the portal, leaving him to confront his arch-nemesis. Momo pointed out that this was not how events had unfolded, as the League had still been present along with Bakugo. Toga expressed confusion about her absence from the scene, prompting Lilith to sigh and explain that this was an alternate universe, and they should simply watch without questioning her. Shinso asked Lilith what had caused her frustration, and she lamented that she was late in posting the latest chapter of her book. Shinso reassured her that it was fine and that readers would understand. Lilith, with tears in her eyes, asked him to convey a message to the readers, which he reluctantly did. With a triumphant grin, Lilith declared that the readers could no longer be angry with her. The confrontation between All Might and All for One began, resulting in chaos all around. In the midst of their battle, All for One used Gran Torino as a shield against All Might's attack. Furious at this tactic, All Might landed a powerful blow that broke All for One's mask, revealing a scarred and eyeless face. All for One retaliated with a massive attack, forcing All Might to protect the civilians behind him, which ultimately revealed All Might's true form to the world. In that moment, All for One revealed the shocking truth about Shigaraki being the grandson of All Might's master. Suddenly, the sound of gunshots filled the air as bullets flew toward All for One. He attempted to evade them but was struck by 4 of the 6 bullets, which injected him with a powerful drag. Confusion swept through the onlookers until a slow clap echoed from the sidelines. The cameras turned to reveal a large group of people clad in green. The heroes and villains alike were stunned, but the villains soon erupted in outrage. Tamura shouted in disbelief at the interference in his mentor's battle. All for One remarked on the unexpected turn of events. A reporter from a circling helicopter announced that it was Verdant, a group known for appearing during crises to assist those in need. The crowd of civilians erupted in cheers for Verdant, causing tension among the heroes present. Midnight noted the group's popularity. When All Might looked back at All for One, he found him sprawled on the ground. As the Verdant group approached the battlefield, the man at the center, dressed in a distinct design, taunted All for One about his predicament, claiming that the drag had been specifically created to counter his abilities. He mockingly suggested that All for One was experiencing significant pain and ordered his subordinates to bring him forward. He sat in the chair with the poise of an emperor on his throne, waiting calmly as some of his men brought AFO's body to his feet. Tamura stood up, his entire body trembling with outrage and anger, expressing his disbelief at the situation. He couldn't understand how anyone could dare to make a fool of his sensei, vowing to take action against them. AFO urged Tamura to calm down, intrigued by the unfolding events. He wanted to see how things would develop. Tamura protested, but AFO insisted he sit down, warning him not to make him repeat himself. Reluctantly, Tamura returned to his seat, a scowl etched on his face. The shock in the room was palpable. This was a man who had just gone toe-to-toe with All Might and emerged victorious, yet here he was, powerless against the Verdant, and the news had reported it as such. Previously, the chapter ended with Aizawa expressing his frustration at Izuku for several minutes. Kaminari, feeling restless, jumped up from his seat, lamenting his fatigue from sitting all day. He needed to stretch his legs, questioning how long they had been there. Ida agreed, expressing his own need to move. He stood up and did some exaggerated robot movements before turning to Lilith, asking if they could take a break. Lilith smiled, acknowledging their need for a pause after witnessing a 16-year-old waging war on an entire country. She paused thoughtfully before explaining that they were in a pocket dimension, isolated from the world, where time had no meaning. Jiru's eyes widened in awe at the revelation. Izuku, practically vibrating with excitement, pulled out a small notebook, bombarding Lilith with questions about the dimensional pocket, her quirk, and the implications of time passing differently. Lilith, feeling overwhelmed by his enthusiasm, urged him to slow down and promised to answer his questions. She began explaining that there are infinite dimensions in the universe, distinguishing between parallel dimensions and entirely different worlds. She described how their world had collided with another, leading to the emergence of quirks due to the mixing of magic and miasma. Nizu reflected on the astounding nature of this revelation, pondering how quirks had come to be. Lilith smiled, noting that the world works in mysterious ways. Just then, a black door appeared on the left wall of the theater, drawing everyone's attention as it slid open. A small black cat with a purple collar bounded inside and leaped into Lilith's arms. She hugged the cat gently, stroking its fur while introducing it to the audience as Loon, the cutest flurkin in the universe. Loon gazed at the audience with her amethyst-like eyes, then jumped from Lilith's arms to approach Eri. She brushed against Eri's legs, purring loudly, and eventually settled on her shoulders, falling asleep. Eri blushed, standing still to avoid waking the cat, while her classmates crowded around her in excitement. Aizawa, a cat lover himself, felt a pang of envy as he watched, unable to join the others without compromising his reputation. Lilith laughed, noting that Loon had taken a liking to Eri, which was a rare occurrence. She explained that Loon usually didn't warm up to others, but if she favored someone, it meant they had earned her protection. The last time Loon had shown such affection to an outsider was 500 years ago. Lilith bent down to Eri, telling her she was very special. Eri's eyes sparkled with delight as she tentatively petted Loon, who purred and snuggled closer. Awais interrupted, his voice filled with awe as he looked beyond the open door, questioning what lay beyond. Lilith smirked, inviting everyone to see for themselves. Without hesitation, the group hurried through the door, gasping in awe at the breathtaking scenery that awaited them. A beautiful white marble platform extended as far as the eye could see, adorned with golden pillars that elegantly rose, intricately carved with mythical creatures and celestial patterns. Emerald gardens bordered the marble platform, their manicured elegance accentuated by fountains of crystalline water that sparkled like liquid diamonds under the ethereal light of the cosmos. The sky, a sea of stars and nebulae shining like jewels, seemed to engulf anyone gazing into its vast expanse. Still in awe of this fantasy-like landscape, the group broke off to explore at their own pace. Lilith, however, thoroughly enjoyed observing the expressions on their faces. She remained attentive to both the heroes' and villains' conversations, curious to see how the scenes she had shown them would affect everyone. If she was being completely honest, the way their universe functioned had frustrated her enough to create a pocket dimension, and now she was eager to witness the changes her actions had brought. A smile crept across her face. This was going to get interesting. Now known as Dobby, was brushing his hand against a creature carved into a pillar, recognizing the majestic griffin before him. He turned at the sound of his mother's voice calling out to him. He had embraced her before, overwhelmed by emotions that made him lose control, and he couldn't afford to make the same mistake again. If he did, it would mean all his efforts were in vain. But it had to mean something. All the suffering he faced, both at the hands of Endeavor and afterward, could not go to waste. He wouldn't allow it. To achieve his goal, he was determined to push away the only woman who loved him, his mother. Taking a deep breath, he steeled his voice and face into an emotionless mask. His eyes widened slightly as he noticed his entire family standing behind his mother, even the trash can was there. He stated firmly that it was Dobby now, feeling his heart break a little at the sight of his mother flinching at his tone. He insisted that Tuya was dead, that he had perished in the fire, and all that remained was Dobby. Ray, with a bittersweet smile, acknowledged his words. She admitted that she owed him an apology for a long time, expressing her regret for not being strong enough to protect him. She wouldn't ask for his forgiveness, knowing she didn't deserve it, but she wanted him to know that no matter what he did in the future, she would always be there waiting. Dobby's eyes widened in shock, his mask slipping as he expressed his intent to harm her husband and possibly her youngest son. He questioned whether she would still welcome him even after such actions. Ray closed her eyes, contemplating her fate. She accepted that perhaps this was her punishment and, with a sense of peace, affirmed that he would always be welcome. Natsuo and Shoto rushed to their mother's side, kneeling beside her and holding her as she cried. Fuyumi stood nearby, silent tears streaming down her face. This moment was more heartbreaking than when they had learned of Tuya's death. Knowing he was alive yet still unable to reach out to him was far more painful than hearing he had died. Behind them, Endeavor realized for the first time the gravity of his actions, questioning what he had done. Meanwhile, Lilith observed the unfolding events with a contemplative sip of her hot chocolate, reflecting on Dobby's chosen path. She shifted her gaze toward Eri, who, along with Koda and the wild pussycats, was playing in one of the fountains. She stifled a laugh at the outraged mew of Loon, who had been doused by a spray of water. The cat, done with the antics, leapt away to groom her fur under a bench. On the other side, the UA staff convened for a serious meeting. Aizawa expressed his disbelief at having missed the obvious signs regarding Midoriya. Hizashi echoed his sentiments, noting how well Midoriya had masked his struggles. Aizawa took responsibility, feeling he should have noticed, given his experience as an underground hero. Nizu interrupted, emphasizing the need to focus on their next course of action. Hound Dog insisted on having Midoriya, Bakugo, and Todoroki in his office twice a week, anticipating that their mental states would be fragile after recent events. Namuri questioned what could possibly be worse than what they had witnessed, while Cementos remarked that Midoriya hadn't lost it yet. Aizawa clarified that the situation was severe enough that there was a possibility of Midoriya losing control. Nizu, stroking his chin in contemplation, hinted at a theory regarding Lilith's control over the verses they had witnessed. The staff awaited his explanation, and Aizawa, growing impatient, urged him to elaborate. Nizu suggested that Lilith might have been deceptive about her inability to control which verse appeared. He pointed out that the verses they had seen so far followed a convenient flow, indicating a deeper connection to Midoriya's history and the reasons behind his current state. When the verse concluded, Lilith promptly disclosed All Might's secret, disregarding the potential repercussions for hero society. The subsequent verses were strategically mapped and revealed. The second verse highlighted his potential as a support mechanic. If he could keep pace with Hatsum, a technical genius, it indicated his own gifts in that field. The third verse depicted his involvement with the League of Villains. It was surprisingly mild. As a villain, he could have been far worse, yet he held back. It felt as though it was preparing everyone for the possibility of him turning to villainy. The fourth verse focused on the corrupt hero commission, unveiling well-kept secrets and sowing doubts about hero society among the students. It also suggested that if he chose to, Midoriya could potentially challenge the commission. This revelation alone was alarming, but when combined with the exposure of corrupt heroes and additional secrets, it could leave a significant impact on the students. Coupled with Midoriya's powerful speech in the Kamino Ward, where he demonstrated his strength, he had captivated the hearts of many, even sending shivers down the spines of those watching. In mere moments, he had swayed more than half of Japan to his side. The thoughts of the students were unfathomable, and the implications for their future choices were uncertain. All they could do was hope they would remain on the right path. Lilith was carefully crafting the flow of the verses, preparing them for more severe events in a way that would safeguard the students' mental well-being. What lay ahead would be on an entirely different level, both physically and psychologically, and they would be powerless to intervene. Aizawa grimaced, noting how much worse the situation appeared when summarized. 13 pointed out that Midoriya had already taken lives, which might lessen the impact. Hound Dog expressed doubt, stating that Midoriya had only killed out of duty, something the students could relate to. However, if they witnessed him killing for enjoyment, it would be hard for them to accept. He sighed, realizing his schedule would be busy from that point onward. Nizu nodded in agreement, suggesting they keep a close watch on the students. They might need to guide them through their fears when the verses became too overwhelming. Lilith was playing a dangerous game that could threaten their world and the heroes, and they could not afford to lose a single student. The staff shared a grim silence, each reflecting on the events of the previous verses. Lilith smiled, acknowledging Nizu's realization, and glanced at the League of Villains, indicating that he was not the only one aware of the situation. AFO remarked on the intriguing turn of events, surprised by the boy's potential. Tamura frowned, expressing his disdain for Midoriya, believing his actions against AFO were unforgivable. AFO reminded Tamura that even he could fail and that they needed to learn from their mistakes. The verses would reveal the weaknesses of both villains and heroes, and they needed to observe carefully. Compress lamented that they had seemingly kidnapped the wrong child. Dobby noted that it wouldn't have mattered. Had they found Midoriya after All Might crushed his dreams, he would have joined them. At the training camp, he was determined to be a hero, making it unlikely they could have changed his path. Toga expressed her disappointment, wishing to see Midoriya on their side again, especially after witnessing him in a more intense situation. AFO assured her that she would have that opportunity. Toga squealed in excitement, and Spinner questioned how AFO knew that. AFO explained that Midoriya had a gifted mind, and should he choose to embrace villainy, he would embody true villainy. He suspected their host was not entirely truthful about the sequence of the verses, hinting that what they had seen was merely a preview of what was to come. Spinner remarked on the tragedy of a true hero, acknowledged by Stain, having to take such a path. He turned to Stain, who stood alone, deep in thought, contemplating the situation. Lilith chuckled at AFO's insights, realizing both sides had come to understand the gravity of the situation. This was bound to become very interesting. Spinner approached Stain, introducing himself as a fan. Stain raised an eyebrow, surprised to learn he had admirers. Spinner explained that many admired both Stain and his ideals. Stain reflected on his belief that All Might was a true hero, yet his actions had led to a tragic outcome for a child. He questioned whether true heroes existed at all. Spinner suggested that it wasn't about true heroes but rather about recognizing that All Might was human and capable of mistakes. To judge him solely on those mistakes seemed unfair. Stain's eyes widened as he processed this realization, understanding that he had placed All Might on a pedestal, failing to see the bigger picture. Spinner encouraged Stain to acknowledge this newfound perspective. Stain thanked him for helping him realize the truth and for admiring him even when he felt unworthy of that admiration. He dipped his hand into the fountain, contemplating the events that had transpired. He had once believed he was right and that All Might was the only true hero, but now he recognized the complexity of the situation. But perhaps he should have been more flexible, and maybe he would have seen a glimpse of a true hero in some of them. Now that he was locked away in Tartarus, there was nothing he could do. The realization came too late. Spinner was on cloud 9 when he heard his idol appreciate him. Stain listened to him, took his advice, talked to him, and appreciated him. This was more than he had ever hoped for. It was a pity that Stain had come to this conclusion too late. Katsuki sat alone on a bench, his thoughts consumed by Izuku's words. He recalled Izuku's promise to take his advice and the painful farewell that followed. He groaned, tilting his head back and resting it against the bench, reflecting on how he had mistreated his childhood friend. He had bullied Izuku beyond repair, even to the point of pushing him to the edge. Yet, Izuku had never held it against him, which only fueled Katsuki's frustration. Izuku had never stood up to him, never fought back, and Katsuki had taken that for granted. He realized how foolish he had been. Katsuki was pulled from his thoughts when a hand landed on his shoulder. He opened his eyes to see Eijiro standing above him, a hand extended and a small smile on his lips. Eijiro hesitantly asked if they could talk. Katsuki's eyes widened. He hadn't expected Kirishima to approach him after everything that had happened. Eijiro feigned offense, noting that it was unfair for Katsuki to suddenly remember his name. Katsuki raised his eyebrows, a slight smile forming as he asked what Eijiro wanted. Just then, Mina interrupted, exclaiming that they were there because they were his friends and that he couldn't get rid of them that easily. She pushed Eijiro aside and sat cross-legged on the ground in front of Katsuki, with Shiro and Denki joining them shortly after. Katsuki took a deep breath and admitted that he had been an awful person. He expressed his regret for everything he had done. Mina smiled and pointed out that it was funny how 4 of them had been bullied in middle school while one had been the bully. Katsuki was surprised to learn that they had faced bullying despite their powerful quirks. Kirishima shared that he had not always been strong and had faced verbal bullying for his quirk, which others deemed useless. Mina revealed that she had been bullied for her looks, enduring hurtful comments that made her question her self-worth. Shiro mentioned that while he hadn't faced outright bullying, he had received harsh comments about his mutation. Denki added that he had struggled with his quirk, often causing embarrassing situations. Katsuki clenched his fists, realizing he had never considered their experiences. He apologized for the nicknames he had used, acknowledging that they had hurt his friends. They reassured him that they understood and even found some of the nicknames amusing. Katsuki asked if they were still friends, and they exchanged smiles before confirming that they were. Katsuki smiled genuinely, free of arrogance, and thanked them. The Baku squad shared a moment of happiness, knowing they had made the right choice. Meanwhile, Gran Torino approached Toshinori, who stood with Namaosa Tsukachi, expressing his dismay over his failures. He lamented that in his quest to become the symbol of peace, he had overlooked the true battles he needed to fight. He had become obsessed with taking down All for One, allowing many issues to fester unnoticed. The Hero Commission's use of hawks as a weapon and the corruption among heroes had opened his eyes to the reality of the world he had tried to protect. Toshinori felt the weight of his role more than ever, especially after witnessing Izuku's devotion and the heavy burden his words carried. He had wanted to be a symbol of hope, but instead he had inadvertently turned those he aimed to protect into monsters obsessed with power and flashy quirks. He questioned how he could ever fix the damage he had caused. Gran Torino reminded him that while he had made many mistakes, forgetting his roots was the worst. Being a symbol wasn't wrong, but he had ignored the consequences of his actions and the influence he had over others. He had allowed the wounds to fester, and now it was time to confront the reality he had neglected. And if Lilith hadn't brought them here, they would have continued to be unaware of the truth, Gran Torino explained. Tsukichi expressed his frustration, stating that fixing the situation was impossible for All Might to do alone. He pointed out that All Might's tendency to handle everything himself had distanced him from the other heroes, making him appear untouchable and inhuman. All Might acknowledged the challenge ahead, realizing he had a lot of work to do starting the next day. Tsukichi scoffed, lamenting that no matter how much work All Might faced, it would always be less than his own. He had just completed his last pending case and was looking forward to a day of rest, but Lilith's unexpected arrival had drastically increased his workload. He held his head in his hands, overwhelmed by the thought of returning to the chaos she had moved upon him. Meanwhile, hawks soared through the air, feeling an unparalleled sense of freedom in the ethereal atmosphere. He landed on a pillar and turned to Tokoyami, who had followed him. Tokoyami admitted he had a question, and as Dark Shadow reached out for some affection, Hawks obliged. Tokoyami asked why Hawks, despite not being free himself, had taught him to fly freely. Hawks replied that those who could fly should do so, regardless of their own limitations. He expressed happiness that Tokoyami had embraced that freedom, sharing the weight of his past experiences. He urged Tokoyami never to let anyone shackle him as he had been. Meanwhile, Ochako and the rest of Class 1A gathered near a pillar depicting a dragon. Ochako encouraged her classmates, reminding them that their friends had endured much and it was their responsibility to support them. Tsuyu acknowledged the challenge, noting they weren't professional therapists, but Ochako insisted that their support was what mattered. Ida agreed, emphasizing their commitment to stand by Midoriya and Todoroki. Toru expressed surprise at Endeavor's troubled past, questioning how the Commission could have overlooked it. Jiro voiced her distrust of the Commission, feeling disillusioned by the corrupt heroes they would have to work under after graduation. Shoji reassured her that even if the situation seemed bleak, striving to be a hero was still worthwhile. Jiro resolved to become a better hero than those they had encountered, and Ojiro echoed that sentiment, affirming their collective goal to be reliable and trustworthy heroes. Momo added that they would support each other and strive to become exemplary heroes together, and the group united in their resolve with a spirited cheer. Lilith observed Izuku standing by a fountain, contemplating her next move. She approached him, her tone soft and inviting. Izuku acknowledged her presence and demanded to know why she had called them there and revealed everything. Lilith contemplated his question and decided to answer honestly, expressing her pity for him. She explained that he had incredible potential but was being molded into something he was not. Her intention was to show him the vastness of his potential and encourage him to discover his own path. Izuku insisted he wasn't trying to fill anyone else's shoes, but Lilith challenged him to reflect on his childhood desire to save people. She pointed out that since meeting All Might, he had aimed to become the symbol of peace, a role that was not inherently his own. Lilith locked eyes with him, emphasizing that pillars do not last forever and that he should not blindly follow in All Might's footsteps. She questioned whether he would repeat All Might's mistakes, reminding him that the only responsibility of the inheritor of One for All was to stop All for One. How he chose to use his quirk beyond that was entirely up to him. As Izuku struggled to articulate his thoughts, Lilith urged him to shed his stutter and find his own voice. "You are a 16-year-old hero student, act like it." Among all the inheritors of One for All, Nana was the first to consider using OFA for heroics. However, she understood that it was never intended for that profession, which is why she concealed her power. Izuku was incredulously surprised to learn that Nana had hidden her power. He asked why she would do such a thing. Lilith explained that it was to prevent the current situation caused by All Might. When Izuku expressed his confusion, Lilith pointed out his unhealthy obsession with All Might. She noted that his devotion to All Might was akin to worship, and when he inherited his quirk, he emulated everything about him. It took him injuring his arms to finally seek a fighting style that suited his body. Lilith emphasized how problematic this was for his future, warning him that his fear of not meeting expectations was limiting him and forcing him to try to fill All Might's shoes. She reminded him that it was his life, not All Might's, and that trying to fulfill others' expectations would only lead to despair. Izuku sought guidance on what to do next. Lilith asked if he still wanted to be a hero, to which he affirmed that there was never any doubt. She encouraged him to pursue his heroics but warned him not to repeat All Might's mistake of creating an insurmountable gap between himself and other heroes. Lilith pointed out that his quirk was a culmination of 8 previous generations, which would naturally create a power difference. With a playful wink, she encouraged him to embrace his unique path. Izuku felt a sense of clarity after their conversation and declared his intention to engage in underground heroics, protecting people from the shadows and patrolling areas that mainstream heroes overlooked. He vowed never to forget his roots. Lilith praised him for this mindset and suggested that he could even establish a hero school when he was older. This idea excited Izuku, and he envisioned a school that would accept quirkless children and those with less flashy quirks, helping them achieve their dreams of becoming heroes. As they prepared to return, Lilith called out to the group, and they made their way back to the theater, leaving the ethereal scenery behind. Each of them returned as a different person than they had been before. Kendo pondered aloud about the infinite parallel dimensions and questioned why only 3 digits were displayed on the screen when the verses began. Lilith explained that, as mortals, they were only allowed to access a limited range of verses. She warned that if they were to glimpse a verse beyond their access, it could lead to madness and eternal wandering in oblivion. Kaminari quickly expressed his desire to avoid such a fate, and Lilith agreed to continue. As the moon illuminated the streets of Mizudafu, a figure clad in black gracefully parkoured across the rooftops, balancing 2 cups of coffee. Midoriya Izuku smiled as he approached a man sitting on the roof of a 4-story building, his scarf fluttering in the wind. Kaminari identified the man as Aizawa, who looked confused upon hearing his name. When Eraserhead turned to see Izuku approaching, he expressed both annoyance and relief at his late arrival. Izuku handed him a cup of coffee, explaining that the queue had been long. Eraserhead sighed, expressing his concern for Izuku, who was known for attracting trouble. The classmates watched in shock as Izuku playfully teased Aizawa, lifting his mask slightly to take a sip of his coffee. Shoto noted that Izuku had called Aizawa Eraserhead, suggesting that he might not have been a student at UA in this scenario. Lilith smiled slyly, pleased with how quickly they were learning. Eraserhead expressed his concern for Izuku, who scowled, making his frustration clear even behind his mask. In their line of work, trouble was always lurking nearby. Eraserhead, wearing a scowl, pointed an accusing finger at Izuku, reminding him that his actions were illegal. Izuku shrugged, explaining that vigilantism wasn't technically illegal, it was only the use of quirks without a license that was against the law, and as a quirkless individual, those rules didn't apply to him. Shoji was taken aback, realizing that Midoriya was a vigilante. Izuku simply shrugged at the questioning gazes, stating that if he hadn't gotten into UA, he would have pursued that path as a backup option. Endeavor, visibly frustrated, demanded to know why Eraserhead was so comfortable with a vigilante and why he hadn't arrested him yet. Aizawa snorted, dismissing Endeavor's concerns, stating that he didn't owe him an explanation. He expressed his exasperation, mentioning the gray hair he was acquiring from dealing with both his students and the challenges they presented. Class 1A mockingly protested, calling themselves anything but heathens. Aizawa raised an eyebrow, insisting he had said nothing wrong, and the heroes laughed at the banter between the sleep-deprived hero and his class. Izuku laughed at Eraserhead's frustration but soon choked on his coffee, prompting the older man to rub his back. After regaining his breath, Izuku asked about Aizawa's student. Mina, confused, wondered who he was referring to. Izuku explained that the student was angry, and he understood that sentiment, especially regarding what had happened to Tensei. Ida clarified that they were talking about him and his older brother. Toru was incredulous, realizing Ida had an older brother. Ida frowned, surprised that he hadn't mentioned him before. Half of Class 1A exclaimed that they hadn't known, and Ida apologized, explaining that his brother, Ida Tensei, was a pro-hero known as Ingenium. He clenched his fists, revealing that Tensei had been attacked by Stain, sustaining injuries that forced him into retirement. Toru expressed her sympathy, and Ida reassured her that it was fine, emphasizing his duty as class president to answer questions. Lilith stood frozen at the door, her eyes widening in disbelief at the state of the theater. The hall was littered with explosion marks and machine parts, and on stage, Mei was bent over a strange machine, tightening a screw. Izuku, standing beside her, laughed, acknowledging that they should have expected this. As the other heroes and villains entered the theater, they were met with the chaotic scene Mei had created. Power Loader exclaimed in disbelief, questioning how Mei had managed to create such a mess in just an hour. He quickly realized he didn't want to hear the answer, grateful that she hadn't blown up the theater yet. Mei, still focused on her work, excitedly shared that watching all the cool inventions had inspired her to create many new projects. Lilith, distraught at the state of her theater, was speechless. Momo noted her shock, while Nizu apologized for the chaos, assuring Lilith that UA would cover the damages. Lilith accepted the apology, admitting she hadn't anticipated this outcome. With a snap of her fingers, the theater returned to its pristine condition, with Mei and her projects neatly relocated to a corner. She sighed and turned to Mei, urging her not to blow up the theater again. Lilith had created a force field to contain any potential explosions, and Mei acknowledged this with a wave. Majima muttered that he needed to keep an eye on her, but Lilith reassured him that it wouldn't be a problem. Clearing her throat, she shifted the focus back to the group, wondering where they had left off. Eri tugged at Lilith's clothes, asking if she was all right. Lilith crouched down to hug the girl, assuring her that she was just a bit surprised. Eri awkwardly patted her back as Loon hissed from her shoulder, only to jump back onto Eri's neck, snuggling against her. Lilith noticed that the heroes and villains had returned to their seats, chatting and enjoying snacks. Even Eri had run off to join the others. Lilith sighed, realizing it wasn't her day, and clapped her hands to regain everyone's attention. She announced that they would continue where they had left off, vowing to get back at them all later. As the scene shifted, a gaunt, malnourished man peeked from behind some debris, his sunken green eyes filled with fear. Ochako gasped, recognizing Deku and questioning what had happened to him. Lilith warned everyone that this was a heavy scene and encouraged them to use the panic room if they felt overwhelmed. The students, now fully focused, wondered what could be so serious that even Lilith was issuing a warning. A sudden flash enveloped the screen, accompanied by a thunderous bang as the storm raged on outside. The students covered their ears at the deafening sound, and the city appeared on the screen, once vibrant and lively, now reduced to a desolate wasteland with no signs of life. Rain poured over the cracked walls and destroyed buildings as unidentifiable creatures of various shapes and sizes slithered through the city. Midnight's eyes widened in horror as she realized the scene before them. Lilith confirmed that they were looking at a city 20 years into the future, in an alternate universe where the events unfolding might not occur in their own world. Dobby noted the thunderstorm, while Mandalay expressed concern about the possibility of such destruction reaching their reality. Lilith, glancing at the heroes with a serious expression, remarked that the outcome depended entirely on them. The storm obscured their view, but the sounds of snarls, growls, and claws scraping against the floor and walls created an eerie symphony that echoed throughout the devastated landscape and into the theater. Pony questioned the dreadful noises and the creatures crawling in the darkness. Lilith grimly instructed them to watch, warning that they would see the consequences of failing to stop Tamura. Tamura, reveling in the chaos, proclaimed his victory over All Might, believing he had succeeded in his mission. AFO frowned, contemplating that he desired to rule the world, not destroy it, and noted that Tamura's actions were going too far. A man scanned the area, gesturing to a person hiding behind him. He took a deep breath, his hand shifting to the pommel of his sword as he stealthily moved through the ruins. Following him was a woman with auburn eyes filled with paranoia, hurrying behind him while carrying another woman who was nearly twice her size. The pink blush on her cheeks contrasted sharply with her grim expression. Mina quietly recognized her friends, Uraraka and Midnight, in distress. Ochako, alarmed, wondered what was happening. The heroes frowned in apprehension as they observed their cherished friends in such a state: sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, and disheveled hair, all signs of malnutrition. Their clothes were torn and filthy as they fled from an unknown enemy. The woman being carried winced with each step, her blue eyes reflecting pain as blood soaked through their clothes. Aizawa expressed concern for Namuri, who acknowledged her injury with a serious frown. The two ran swiftly, their footsteps silent to avoid attracting the attention of the lurking creatures. Suddenly, the man stepped on a plastic wrapper, causing both of them to freeze, sharing a moment of fear and resignation. Ida questioned why they had stopped, noting it was just a small crunch. Lightning illuminated their surroundings, revealing a grotesque creature with an unhinged jaw and sharp fangs descending toward the man. The theater erupted in screams, with many covering their eyes as the scene unfolded. He jumped aside just in time, pushing the woman toward a small shelter formed by a broken wall. The woman dove inside without hesitation, releasing the older woman, who slumped to the ground in pain, blood seeping from her side. Recovery Girl assessed the situation, expressing concern over Namuri's serious injury and the need for immediate medical attention. Hizashi insisted that she would survive, a statement that sent a chill through the heroes, as the thought of losing someone so beloved was unbearable. The younger woman pressed her sweater against Namuri's wound, desperately trying to stem the bleeding while the man fought for survival against the towering creature. Kaminari, horrified, questioned what the creature was. Lilith explained that it was something that should not exist in any world, hoping to avoid giving Tamura any ideas. The creature was unlike anything anyone had ever seen, with a gangly figure and protruding bones. Its malicious intent was evident as it lunged at the man, who skillfully blocked its deadly strikes with his sword. Stain noted that the man's skill indicated he had faced such threats before. The creature attacked with lethal precision, and the man met its assault head-on, fueled by his will to survive. Ida marveled at the man's speed, while 13 admitted that she would not have survived such an encounter. The theater guests realized that none of them could withstand the monster's onslaught, let alone fight back. Each clash of weapon against claw created a chaotic melody, a dance of survival and death in the rain. Stain, mesmerized by the scene, remarked on the beauty of the fight, captivated by the man's skill and determination. No one could argue with him as they watched the primal energy of the battle unfold, a desperate struggle for survival that was both terrifying and enthralling. The man grit his teeth as he slid across the muddy ground, a long tail slamming into his side. His eyes widened as he lost his balance and fell to the ground, the fight for survival intensifying. The creature, radiating with bloodlust, lunged forward, its eyes glistening with deep-seated malevolence, locked onto him once more as its jaw opened with a growl, coming for the kill. Inko jumped from her seat, calling out for her son. He looked into the maw of danger, his gaze shifting to the two women hiding behind the rocks. Tears filled their eyes as the younger one held back the older, one hand covering her mouth in a desperate attempt to reach him, her arms outstretched in a silent plea. Midnight felt a sense of urgency, reflecting on how close they must have been in this universe. Aizawa whispered a warning, while Toga expressed her concern for Izuku. Confusion washed over him as the younger woman locked eyes with him, her hands coming together in a familiar gesture. Suddenly, a guttural screech echoed, followed by a thud from the creature. He turned back to see its tail and lower body trapped beneath a pile of bricks and rubble. With determination, he jumped up, narrowly avoiding its claws as it hissed at him, revealing the slightest hint of fear. It had realized it was stuck and couldn't escape. Class 1A cheered, and the heroes breathed a sigh of relief, rallying behind Uraraka's bravery. Izuku, feeling shaky, expressed his gratitude to Uraraka, who was equally rattled but reassured him not to mention it. Ignoring the creature's warnings, he leaped onto its back, leaning forward to avoid its snapping jaw, and drove his sword into the small cavity between its shoulder blades. Kirishima cheered him on, praising his bravery. The creature screeched in pain, its cry alerting others nearby. It squirmed beneath him, trying to throw him off, but he held on, driving his sword deeper until it finally stilled. Breathing a sigh of relief, he yanked his sword free and slid down its back, stumbling toward his companions, his body shaking and breaths labored as he leaned against the wall beside the older woman. Dobby acknowledged Izuku's victory, impressed that he had defeated the creature despite being quirkless. As his knees buckled, he slid to the ground, enveloped in a fierce hug from the two women. They all broke down in silent tears, clutching each other tightly. Class 1A surrounded Uraraka, while Aizawa held Nemuri's hand, ensuring her safety. Hawks extended his wings to Izuku, who trembled as his mother held him tightly, both of them crying. Inko whispered to Izuku, checking if he could hear her. He nodded, regaining his bearings and thanking Ochako for saving him. She smiled through her tears, expressing her relief that he was okay. Inko rasped her concern, fearing they had lost him. Izuku admitted he felt the same and apologized to Nemuri, who smiled at him before a growl rumbled behind them. They peeked through the openings of their shelter, spotting 3 other creatures with black skins sniffing around the fallen one. Toru pleaded for them to stop, realizing they were trapped. Nemuri whispered for Izuku and Ochako to run when she gave the signal, her hands trembling as she released them. The atmosphere turned tense, and Class 1A echoed their disapproval, urging her not to sacrifice herself. Izuku took a deep breath, insisting that she couldn't do this. Aizawa and Hizashi tightened their grips, understanding the gravity of the situation. Nemuri gasped, realizing she was facing her end, but felt a sense of peace knowing Izuku and Ochako might escape. Nizu frowned, having identified the creatures as Nomu mutants capable of independent thought and predatory instincts, a terrifying realization. Izuku and Ochako exchanged glances, their eyes widening in understanding. Ochako broke down, her tears mingling with the rain. Izuku vehemently refused to leave her behind, insisting there had to be a way. Nemuri smiled gently, reassuring him that it was all right and that they both knew there was no other option. Despite his protests, she explained that even if they found a way to take her, she wouldn't survive long enough to reach safety. Her hands shook as she faced her fear, asking him to let her ensure their survival. Izuku's heart ached as he begged her to reconsider, his voice filled with desperation. Nemuri pulled him into a hug, and he clung to her, savoring the warmth and comfort she provided even in the rain. As he inhaled the sweet scent of her quirk, Shiro realized she had used it to comfort him. Izuku's eyes widened in realization as he pushed himself away from her, understanding the weight of her sacrifice. He attempted to stand but fell back down, blinking furiously in disbelief as he tried to shake off the effects of the dust. Aizawa and Hizashi both had tears in their eyes as they watched Midnight's determination. They couldn't even beg her to reconsider because they understood her choice. If they were in her position, they would have made the same decision. Yet, that knowledge did not ease the pain in their hearts as they focused on the screen. Nemuri held his face in her hands and kissed his forehead one last time before turning to Ochako, who sat beside them, her hands covering her mouth as her body shook with tears. She opened her arms and invited the girl into a hug, whispering that she loved them both and urging her to go. Ochako choked out an apology, tightening her grip around Nemuri. She felt torn, unable to bear the thought of choosing between them. Nemuri gently pecked her forehead and looked her in the eye, asking her to take care of him. She warned that he would be angry when he regained his senses, but pleaded with Ochako to look after him. Trembling with grief and cold, Ochako nodded shakily. With confirmation, Nemuri pushed them away and dashed out of their shelter, narrowly missing Izuku's fingers. She pressed a small device into her hands, a portable alarm system. The alarm's sound rang through the air, drawing the attention of every creature within a 10-mile radius, distracting them from Izuku and Ochako. Aizawa breathed Nemuri's name, while Hizashi leaned into Midnight, gripping the back of her seat tightly. Izuku struggled against the effects of the sleeping agents from Nemuri's quirk, feeling his body grow weightless and lift into the air. Ochako held him by the waist and made a break for it. Tsuyu hugged Ochako, assuring her it was all right and that she didn't have to look away. But Ochako insisted she had to face it, unable to turn away from the reality before her. They watched as Nemuri smiled in relief, even as the creatures closed in on her. Aizawa and Hizashi's cries echoed throughout the theater, overlapping with Izuku's as they jumped from their seats, reaching out toward the screen, helplessly witnessing their friend's fate. The other students and heroes covered their eyes at the distressing sight. Izuku's scream pierced the city before it was abruptly silenced as Ochako knocked him out. She ran, her own eyes brimming with unshed tears, whispering her apologies. Tears flowed freely from Ochako as she repeated her apologies, shaking her head in denial and regret. Her sorrow was interrupted by a warm embrace. Looking up, she saw Nemuri's smiling face, tears in her eyes. Nemuri whispered that Ochako had done well, that she was brave and had honored her last wishes. She expressed her pride in Ochako. Ochako, overwhelmed, hugged Nemuri tightly, pleading for her not to make her face such a choice again and to promise not to die. Midnight assured her that she wouldn't, promising to stay safe. Both the heroes and students were left in shock, unprepared for the events that had unfolded. Lilith's warning had not been in vain, and they painfully realized the truth of her words. They were so consumed by their emotions that they didn't notice how long Ochako had been running. The ruins blurred around her as she sprinted through the city. She stopped in front of a building, picked the lock, and scurried inside, bolting the door behind her before heading to a trapdoor beside the wall. She yanked it open and climbed in. Kurwaro remarked that it was their base, to which Tamura scoffed, claiming theirs was far better. Lilith told him to be quiet. A voice questioned from the dark basement, prompting Aizawa to recognize it as Hizashi's. Hizashi frowned, confirming he knew. Ochako responded, shutting the trapdoor behind her and releasing Izuku, who fell to the ground. The fall roused him, and he slowly pushed himself into a sitting position, still under the effects of the gas. A small flame ignited the room as one of the other occupants lit the lamp, revealing 6 others. Dobby identified present Mike, Eraserhead, and himself, while Nijire and Tamaki were also present. Hawks noted his presence as well. Hizashi sighed in relief upon seeing them unharmed, but then froze, locking eyes with Ochako, asking where Nemuri was. Momo expressed concern that they would be heartbroken. Izuku froze at the mention of her name, whispering in disbelief. He stood up and grabbed Ochako's collar, demanding to know why she had left her behind. Ochako, now sitting back in her seat holding Tsuyu's hand, reassured him that she understood he didn't mean it. The other occupants shifted toward them, and Shota dropped the bag he was holding, his eyes wide with disbelief. Hizashi voiced his shock at the mention of little listeners. Ochako closed her eyes, explaining that they had been ambushed, and one of the creatures had reached Nemuri's side. She choked out that Nemuri had been losing too much blood and had made her run. Izuku hissed that she had left her behind, tightening his grip. Ochako insisted she had no choice, explaining that if they had stayed, all 3 of them would have perished. Shota whispered in disbelief, while Hizashi closed his eyes, calling out Nemuri's name. Inko and the heroes widened their eyes in shock at Izuku's outburst, finally understanding his reaction. Ochako grabbed Izuku's collar, asserting that she had known Nemuri for a decade before he arrived. She declared that Nemuri had been her mentor and support, and when she had lost everything, Nemuri had been there for her. She expressed her pain, emphasizing that Nemuri had wanted them to live, and urged Izuku not to blame her for the decision. Izuku apologized again, realizing the weight of their shared loss. That was very mean of her. She knew he didn't want to leave anyone behind as much as she did. She felt remorse for getting angry at him for no reason. Both of them let go of each other, their breaths heavy and bodies trembling. Ochako fell to the ground, bringing her knees to her chest and wrapping her arms around them. She insisted it wasn't her fault, repeating the words in a shaky voice. Hizashi, sitting beside her, whispered that he understood, tears streaming down his face as he hugged her gently from the side. Ochako's eyes were filled with tears, and she muffled her sobs with a hand over her mouth. The students of Class 1A felt helpless as they watched their classmate break under the weight of her choices. No one should ever have to make such a difficult decision. She turned to him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and buried her face in his chest, whispering her apologies. Hisashi reassured her that it wasn't her fault and that she had done the right thing. He pulled her closer, glancing at his husband, who wore a similarly pained expression. Shota approached Izuku, who was still shaking, his eyes filled with guilt. He urged Izuku to calm down, but Izuku lamented that he couldn't save her, that she had been right there, and he had failed to protect her. Shota tightened his embrace, expressing his own confusion about their fight and the losses they were enduring. He questioned when it would stop, if it would ever stop. The screen turned black, and Aizawa and Hisashi leapt from their seats, pulling Midnight into a hug. It was a silent confirmation for them that she was alive, warm, and with them. Izuku and Ochako rushed to the panic room as Inko turned to Mitsuki. This verse had been the hardest anyone had faced so far, leaving everyone unsure of how to cope. Something had broken because of this verse, something significant and irreversible. A single thought lingered in everyone's minds. Would they survive long enough to return home? The atmosphere in the theater was somber, a heavy silence enveloping the guests as they processed the loss they had witnessed. Even the villains remained silent, paying respect to the fallen heroine. It was an unspoken rule among them to honor the strong, and Midnight had proven her strength. She had faced death with defiance, earning their respect. The impact of Midnight's death weighed heavily on the UA faculty and students. Namuri Kayama was the heart of UA, and her loss struck them harder than anything else. The staff, having known her longer, felt the loss most acutely, as they were like family. Ken had tears in his eyes, Majima stared blankly, Cementos held his hands together in a silent prayer, and Nizu frowned, his tail twitching anxiously. Hound Dog had closed his eyes, while Recovery Girl wiped her tears with a handkerchief. Ectoplasm sobbed quietly, and All Might gritted his teeth, finding it difficult to let go of the vibrant personality that had brightened their lives. 13 was openly crying, and Snipe held his head in his hands, his body shaking with grief. Lunch Rush, obscured by his mask, clearly showed signs of distress. But the most affected were 3 friends holding each other tightly. Shota and Hisashi refused to let go of Namuri, who embraced them with equal intensity. Shota thought to himself that she was safe in their arms and reassured himself that she would not die, not in this world. Hisashi struggled to comprehend what had happened, recalling Lilith's warning about the consequences of letting Shigaraki win. He had witnessed Namuri's death and felt powerless to change it, vowing that it wouldn't happen again. Namuri, in her thoughts, expressed her sorrow for leaving them behind and her determination to grow stronger, promising she wouldn't abandon them again. Lilith mused that perhaps this time, Namuri wouldn't meet her end in the meta-liberation war. Nizu reflected on the creatures they had encountered, recognizing them as Nomus. He realized that their evolution could not be allowed in their world and resolved to be more vigilant against All for One and the League. On the other side of the theater, Tamura questioned why he felt no satisfaction at the death of the heroine. He pondered his destructive tendencies and what the version of himself in that world was doing. AFO noted that Tamura's destructive nature had intensified and that he needed to be cautious with his future plans, recognizing Tamura as a pawn who could not be allowed to overtake his consciousness. In the playroom, Eri and Koda sat in a vibrant, child-friendly space filled with toys and swings. They were at a play table, drawing and chatting happily, oblivious to the turmoil outside. Eri wondered if the situation might have ended by now, while Koda speculated that if it had, they would have been taken back. Expressed her fondness for the room, noting the plushies of Deku. Koda suggested they could ask Lilith about taking Deku's merchandise, and Eri agreed that it was worth inquiring before they returned. Inside the panic room, Izuku confided in Ochako, expressing his struggle with the ongoing situation. He had hoped that after their break, he would be able to handle whatever challenges lay ahead, but the reality was overwhelming. He admitted that watching everything unfold was increasingly difficult, and he reflected on his past, acknowledging the darkness he had faced. Ochako understood his pain, sharing her own heartbreak upon learning about his struggles before joining UA. She realized how little she had understood about his life and their friendship. Izuku, surprised by her self-criticism, reassured her of her importance in his life. He emphasized that she was his first true friend and had given him strength. Ochako was taken aback by his heartfelt words, and Izuku affirmed that nothing would change their bond, even if she felt the need to distance herself after witnessing the harsh truths. Ochako playfully called him an idiot, clarifying that the experiences they saw in the verses did not define who they were. She promised to always be his friend, no matter what they encountered. Izuku's face lit up with a radiant smile, and he expressed his gratitude, realizing it was time to return. As they prepared to move on, Lilith announced that everyone seemed refreshed and hinted at the next verse they would explore. Aizawa sighed, questioning what was to come, while Lilith smiled mysteriously, leaving them in suspense about the unfolding events. The next verse was ominously titled, "Kill Tashinori Yagi," and the countdown began. Kirishima noted that the situation was not good. Lilith addressed Eri and Kota, mentioning that she had overheard their previous conversation and that they could take home anything they wanted. However, she had something even more intriguing to offer. Kota, understanding her hint, jumped from his chair and eagerly pulled Eri back to the playroom, expressing his gratitude to Lilith. The scene shifted to a dimly lit room with a table at its center. Izuku Midoriya, a 17-year-old, was bound to the table with cork-canceling cuffs. Namosa Tsukachi entered the room, questioning whether this was an interrogation room and if Izuku had done something illegal. Izuku protested, claiming he had never been in cuffs at a police station before. Yanagi suggested that perhaps he was a villain again, but Izuku remained unfazed, grinning as Namaosa walked in. Aizawa remarked on the familiarity between them, while Tsuyu pointed out Izuku's relaxed demeanor despite the circumstances. Izuku brightened at the thought that he might not have committed a crime, and Ochako hoped that was true as well. Namosa frowned, dropping a thick file on the table and taking a seat across from Izuku, demanding to know where a certain individual was. Dobby commented on Namaosa's bluntness, and Izuku playfully asked if that was how he questioned everyone. Spinner laughed, pointing out that Izuku had indeed been caught. Izuku looked to Lilith for confirmation, while she merely shrugged with an amused smile. He pouted, expressing disappointment that Namaosa hadn't even greeted him. The students and All Might shared a laugh, while Aizawa snorted in amusement. Namaosa raised an eyebrow at Izuku, who tried to suppress his laughter. He apologized, insisting that he couldn't be blamed for someone else's actions. Nizu observed their interaction, suspecting that this wasn't the first time they had engaged in such banter. Tsukachi snapped at Izuku, instructing him to answer truthfully if he wanted any leniency. Kurojiri commented on the situation, and Tamura dismissed the others as foolish. Izuku questioned how cooperating would benefit him, to which Dobby remarked that at least Izuku had the basics down. Namaosa reiterated that if Izuku cooperated he could help lighten his sentence, but warned that he would still be going to jail. Inko reassured Izuku that he hadn't done anything to deserve punishment, and Lilith expressed doubt about that assurance. Izuku smiled confidently, resting his elbows on the table and teasingly asking if Namaosa had even read his file. Momo was astonished by Izuku's confidence, while Mina commented on his looks and demeanor, noting how powerful he seemed. The girls discussed their impressions of Izuku, while he hid his face in embarrassment. Shoto found himself agreeing with some of their observations, while Kaminari was struck by how easily Izuku had captured the girl's attention. Aizawa glared at Midnight, warning her not to join in. Tsukachi confirmed that he had read Izuku's file, leading Izuku to point out that being quirkless made him invisible to the law. Ochako protested that it wasn't fair, but Izuku shrugged, indicating that there was nothing they could do about it. Tsukachi warned Izuku that prison was not kind to quirkless individuals, and Izuku responded with laughter, shaking with amusement. Tsukachi watched with growing irritation as Izuku continued to laugh uncontrollably. Once he calmed down, he explained that the treatment of quirkless people was harsh, suggesting that even prison might be better than the outside world. Aizawa noted that in prison, one could at least expect hostility from others, while the outside world held unpredictable dangers. Izuku warned that even friends could betray one another. Katsuki clenched his fists, reflecting on his past actions against Izuku. Tsukachi demanded an explanation for Izuku's laughter, while Namosa found the situation unsettling. Izuku apologized, finding it amusing that Tsukachi thought he understood the plight of quirkless individuals. Tsukachi insisted he had reviewed the statistics and wanted to help, but Izuku warned that he had made a mistake by saying that. Tsukachi looked at Izuku with confusion and concern, sensing that this version of Izuku was unstable. Izuku's expression turned serious as he declared that Tsukachi didn't truly understand the struggles faced by quirkless people. Unless one experiences it firsthand, they remain just numbers on a screen. Midnight acknowledged the truth in that statement. The detective and Izuku exchanged glances, the latter's expression still unreadable. Izuku asserted that he didn't require assistance, claiming he was managing just fine on his own. Kaminari pointed out that being arrested didn't quite fit the definition of doing fine. Izuku, reflecting on his own nature, suggested that his arrest had been intentional. Namaosa looked sharply at him, questioning what he meant. Izuku sighed, sensing the conversation was taking a turn he didn't like, and suggested that they could see for themselves, hinting that the other version of Namaosa was involved. Namaosa expressed that this revelation did little to ease his concerns. Tsukichi crossed his arms, emphasizing the consequences of Izuku's actions. His empire was in ruins, his allies were scattered and hiding, and he was now in chains. He declared that there was nothing Izuku could do now, as they had defeated him. Izuku grinned, warning Tsukichi to be careful, as overconfidence often leads to downfall. Tsukichi insisted he was merely stating facts and leaned forward, asserting that it was over and that Izuku had nowhere to run. The atmosphere grew tense as silence enveloped the room, causing unease among those present. Tsukichi reached out to touch Izuku's shoulder but quickly withdrew upon noticing the tremors in the boy's body. A small giggle escaped Izuku, followed by another, sending chills down the spines of the students watching. They had never imagined that a simple laugh could sound so unsettling, especially coming from someone they considered innocent. Izuku's giggles escalated into a maniacal laugh, startling Tsukichi, who instinctively recoiled. With his head tilted back, Izuku's laughter echoed in the interrogation room, growing more intense before suddenly stopping. He looked down at Tsukichi, a wild gleam in his emerald eyes, questioning who was running and why. Tamura expressed his approval of this new side of Izuku, while Toga squealed in delight, commenting on how thrilling it was, even suggesting it would have been better with some blood. Namaosa felt pity for his counterpart in another universe, unable to fathom being on the receiving end of such madness. Izuku acknowledged the truth in that, admitting that even he recognized the darkness within. Nizu worried for the students, sensing that Izuku was becoming increasingly unstable with each passing moment. Izuku slammed his fists on the table, leaning toward Tsukichi with a fierce intensity that made the detective flinch. Though Tsukichi was momentarily stunned, Izuku managed to regain his composure. Taking a deep breath, Izuku sat back and expressed his disappointment in the prison experience, claiming it was boring. A devious grin spread across his face as he proposed a game, prompting concern from Namaosa about what it might entail. Tsukichi narrowed his eyes, confusion and wariness evident on his face, while Izuku continued, teasing that Tsukichi wanted to know where Hoshino was. Awase questioned who Hoshino was, while Tamura suggested he was likely another non-playable character. Hisashi wondered why Tsukichi was searching for him. Tsukichi accused Izuku of having taken Hoshino, but Izuku cheerfully denied it, claiming he had no use for him. He hinted at knowing someone who was planning to capture Hoshino, feigning confusion about the name. The glimmer in his eyes revealed his intent, while Tsukichi's frustration became apparent. Aizawa noted that Izuku wanted something in return, prompting Namaosa to wonder what it could be. Tsukichi groaned, rubbing his face in exasperation, asking what Izuku would demand this time. All for one remarked on the surprising nature of the exchange, while Izuku requested that Tsukichi stop being surprised. Izuku clapped his hands together, expressing his delight at Tsukichi's engagement in the game. He leaned over the table, whispering a shocking request into the detective's ear, to eliminate Toshinori Yagi. The room fell silent, both heroes and villains taken aback by the absurdity of the demand. Tamura burst into laughter, clearly entertained by the situation. Namosa crossed his arms, frowning at the suggestion, while All Might expressed confidence in Tsukichi's refusal. All for One chided All Might for not considering the implications, explaining that Izuku was cornering Tsukichi and that the detective had already lost the moment he faced the boy. The heroes felt a wave of dread wash over them, grateful that Izuku had not succumbed to darkness. The students were on edge, struggling to reconcile the idea that their classmate, who idolized All Might, would contemplate such an act. Tsukichi, in shock, leaned back in his seat, gasping in disbelief at the request. Izuku confirmed his words, reiterating the clarity of his demand. The tension in the room was palpable, and the stakes had never felt higher. Izuku declared that he was not a murderer like his opponent. The villain responded with a twisted enthusiasm, expressing a desire to witness a law-enforcing detective in a dire situation, hinting at a dark form of entertainment. The heroes felt a chill as they realized that Izuku was taking pleasure in Tsukichi's suffering, a side of him they had never seen before. Izuku clenched his fists, aware that his darker self would relish the thought of harming his mentor. The idea pained him deeply. Tsukichi dismissed the notion that he would ever act on such a threat, insisting it would never happen. Izuku chuckled softly, reminding Tsukichi that he had never truly given him a choice in their twisted game. All Might, observing the scene, reluctantly acknowledged that his nemesis had a point. AFO, grinning with excitement, found the unfolding drama to be highly entertaining. Tsukichi insisted that even the lives of many were not worth sacrificing All Might's life. Izuku, however, proposed a chilling task, to poison Mizurufu's water supply. The heroes gasped in shock, horrified by the suggestion. Tsukichi yelled in disbelief, questioning how Izuku could even consider such an act, aware of the countless lives at stake. Izuku tilted his head, taunting Tsukichi about the implications of his choices, suggesting that All Might's demise was now a real possibility. Namosa, filled with dread, realized the gravity of the situation and the potential consequences for the innocent. All Might reflected on his willingness to sacrifice himself for others, never imagining that his closest friend would be the one to bring him to such a fate. Tsukichi, in disbelief, recognized the madness of the situation and what it might force him to do. Izuku, with a grin, revealed that he had no immediate plans for such a drastic action, leaving Tsukichi in a state of shock. The tension escalated as Izuku announced another ultimatum, leading to a revelation about a recent incident involving children and poisoned fruit punch. Izuku, horrified at the thought of targeting innocent children, vehemently rejected the idea, asserting that he would never stoop so low. The others were left bewildered, grappling with the implications of Izuku's actions. As the situation unfolded, Tsukichi whispered in horror, questioning what Izuku had done. Namosa expressed his discomfort, while All Might shared the sentiment. Tamura, reveling in the chaos, found amusement in the hero's distress. Izuku then issued a chilling ultimatum, 1 week to bring him All Might's lifeless body in exchange for an antidote. Namosa felt a flicker of hope, believing there might be time to find a solution, but Aizawa cautioned that it wouldn't be so simple. Tsukichi, trembling and pale, begged Izuku to reconsider, feeling the weight of despair. Izuku revealed that Tsukichi was the only one he had left unharmed, prompting the detective to question the motives behind such cruelty. The heroes and villains leaned in, eager to hear Izuku's reasoning. He explained that throughout their twisted game, they had always engaged in fair deals, challenging Tsukichi to adhere to the rules he had set. Kaibara questioned the notion of fairness in making deals with a criminal, while AFO dismissed the idea that Izuku could offer anything of value. Izuku, however, proposed a new deal. If Tsukichi killed All Might, he would provide valuable information about the Meta Liberation Army and answer 5 questions truthfully. The heroes were taken aback by the stakes, with Lilith noting the immense value of such information. All Might realized the scale of the threat posed by the Meta Liberation Army, recognizing the need for caution in their approach. Tsukichi, still in disbelief, questioned whether this was how Izuku had dealt with previous detectives, fearing the madness that could drive someone to such extremes. The heroes were left stunned, grappling with the implications of Izuku's descent into darkness and the choices that lay ahead. This verse had left them speechless many times, but none had felt as sick as this. How insane must someone be to drive 4 detectives, who dealt with psychotic villains daily, to such despair? It was unheard of, unacceptable for someone to meet such an end. Izuku chuckled, his eyes glinting with amusement. He seemed to relish the moment, prompting Masa to feel a chill run down his spine. Shoji shook his head, expressing his discomfort with this darker side of Midoriya. Tokoyami added that Izuku had unfortunately been completely overtaken by darkness. Tsukichi's grip tightened on the table as he sat up straight, demanding to know how they had died. Midnight expressed her pity for Tsukichi, acknowledging the pressure he felt. Namaosa, trying to maintain his composure, hoped he wouldn't be broken by the end of it and turned to Lilith, asking if she could reveal his fate. Lilith shook her head, suggesting he draw his own conclusions from what he observed. The criminal spoke with a drawl, indicating that the detectives had met their ends in their own special ways. One had cracked under pressure, leading to an unfortunate conclusion. The atmosphere in the theater grew tense, as the heroes felt an unexplainable dread while listening to Izuku. For the students who had never encountered such a villain, this was a frightening moment. They struggled to comprehend how he could be so casual after driving someone to such despair. A shiver ran down Tsukichi's spine as he inquired about the others. Izuku mused that they were a different story. One had been too curious, delving too deep, and another had a fatal attraction to the truth. The last one simply couldn't resist the temptation of power. Izuku felt a wave of nausea at the sight of his other self, knowing from experience that it wasn't just one thing that leads someone to such a state. It's the little things that pile up, suffocating until the only way out seems to be. Tsukichi whispered that Izuku was a monster. Izuku laughed, a harsh sound, asserting that monsters get things done and questioned the definition of a monster, suggesting it was merely a matter of perspective. Setsuna shouted in disbelief, questioning how Izuku could claim it was just perspective after driving 4 innocent people to their deaths. Toga, standing up, expressed her view that she didn't consider herself a monster, insisting that she lived doing what she liked, despite being labeled as such. Ochako confronted her, stating that she killed innocents and was a villain who didn't care about others. Toga responded playfully, expressing her affection for Ochako while still wanting to see her covered in blood. Dobby intervened, reminding Toga to behave, or she might miss more sights of her boyfriend. Tsukichi gulped, his voice barely a whisper as he asked if Izuku was enjoying this. Izuku leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with amusement, and challenged Tsukichi to give him the performance he wanted or crumble like the others. Tsukichi stood, shaking with despair, and requested time before leaving the interrogation room, the door slamming shut behind him. At the table, Izuku folded his arms, turning his attention to All Might, who sighed, realizing this was revenge against him and expressing his sorrow for Namaosa. Namaosa reassured him that while his actions might have been wrong, they were not his fault. Aizawa addressed the students, explaining that villains would use every means necessary to gain the upper hand. He emphasized the importance of staying vigilant and calm, especially when facing unpredictable opponents who might threaten their loved ones or innocents. Class 1A and 1B responded affirmatively, acknowledging Aizawa's guidance. Nizu supported Aizawa's words, warning that villains know how to manipulate others and that a lack of awareness could lead to dire consequences. Mina expressed her nerves about the situation, while Izuku admitted to feeling goosebumps the entire time. Kendo noted that it was becoming harder to be surprised, and Katsuki questioned what was wrong with Izuku's mindset. Lilith pointed out that Katsuki's own verses contained much more violence than Izuku's. Katsuki vehemently denied ever becoming a villain. Lilith smiled mysteriously, suggesting that only time would tell. Tamura snorted, still believing Izuku was a villain, which prompted Katsuki to confront him. Dobby added that Katsuki had a troubled past, but Aizawa cut in, defending his students and asserting that villains had no right to speak about them. Lilith decided. It was time to wrap things up, clearing her throat and snapping her fingers. Eri and Koda appeared in their seats, their mouths and hands covered in chocolate. Mandalay brought out paper towels to help clean them off, suggesting they keep the next verse lighthearted. Lilith waved her hand, assuring everyone it would be fine. As the countdown began, Ochako guessed that Deku was the singer in this verse, which made Jairu perk up with interest. Lilith posed with her hands giving a thumbs up, confirming Ochako's guess. The screen came to life, revealing a massive stage bathed in dazzling lights. A man walked onto the stage with a violin, playing melodious and powerful notes that filled the theater with excitement. The audience, especially those on the hero side, felt relieved and happy to see a normal verse. Jairu exclaimed how beautiful the melody was as the other band members took their positions, waving to the crowd. Kyoka Jairu sat behind the drums, beaming with joy, while Denki Kaminari strolled to the front with a guitar, accompanied by another guitarist beside an already positioned piano. Jairu pointed at Denki, teasing him about his guitar skills, to which Denki acted heartbroken, claiming he was a badass guitarist in this verse. Komori narrowed her eyes, recognizing the other guitarist as Tsunatori. Kurwaro perked up at her words, while Awase insisted that it couldn't be their Tsunatori, noting her tattoos and distinct hairstyle. Tetsu commented on how manly she looked with the guitar, panicking after realizing his words might offend her. Nito leaned down to whisper to Tsunatori, who nodded and turned to Tetsu, expressing her confusion about his dramatic reaction. Vlad King sighed at his class, telling Monoma to stop giving Tsunatori incorrect translations and reassuring Tetsu that he would be fine. The class responded with a chorus of agreement before shifting their focus back to the performance. Momo expressed disbelief that the woman was Tsunatori, while Setsuna confirmed her identity from a previous makeup experiment. Nieto boasted about Class 1B being ahead of Class 1A, claiming Tsunatori would be a better guitarist than Denki. Denki, unfazed, asked what Nieto had called him, to which Nieto taunted him further. Vlad King interjected, asking about the experiment, and Setsuna explained it was a Halloween competition for the best goth look. Kurwaro proudly claimed his connection to darkness had made him the obvious winner. Lilith interrupted, urging them to continue the verse, while Kurwaro suspiciously agreed, hinting at Midoriya's descent into darkness. As the verse continued, the main singer strolled in, guitar in hand, pointing at the crowd as their screams grew louder. The music picked up, and Izuku Midoriya stood at the center of the stage, energizing the audience. Eri cheered for Deku, who engaged the crowd, encouraging them to make noise. The theater echoed with cheers as the band kicked off with a powerful tempo. A deep bass line built anticipation as the lights dimmed, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Izuku's voice rang out, raw and intense, singing about love and longing. Jiraiya was surprised by his singing talent, while Izuku admitted he had no idea he could sing. The band intensified their performance, and Inko watched with tears in her eyes, proud of her son's beautiful voice. As the song progressed, the crowd joined in passionately, creating a wall of sound. Jairu expressed her excitement about being in a popular band, and Siro asked if she enjoyed it. She nodded enthusiastically, sharing that it was her dream to perform in a band. The energy in the theater soared as the band continued to play, with Nieto teasing Class 1A about their guitarist skills, while Kendo urged him to be quiet. Izuku wanted to enjoy this moment without worrying about keeping anyone in check. The lights flashed, illuminating the stage as the music began to play. He felt a rush of emotions as he sang, his voice filled with vulnerability. The crowd was captivated, and he could hardly believe he was performing so confidently in front of so many people. As the melody slowed, creating a more NTMT atmosphere, he continued to sing, expressing his desire to be there for someone in need. Momo closed her eyes, appreciating the song's beauty, even if it was different from her usual classical preferences. The band built tension with a haunting melody, and Izuku's voice soared, filled with passion. The energy in the theater was electric as the crowd joined in, their voices rising in unison. Izuku sang with conviction, and Denki, with a wide grin, attempted to sing along, adding to the lively atmosphere. The band delivered powerful notes, and the audience cheered, their excitement palpable. As the song progressed, the students jumped in their seats, fully immersed in the performance. Izuku's hopeful voice resonated throughout the venue, and Toru felt her heart flutter with joy. The band reached a climactic moment, and the crowd erupted with enthusiasm, singing along with fervor. The cheers echoed through the venue as the performance came to an end, leaving everyone buzzing with excitement. The theater fell silent for a moment before erupting into applause. Mina exclaimed how good Izuku was, calling him a hidden gem. Denki chimed in, proudly declaring his own talent on the guitar. Jairu, surprised by her own reaction, complimented Izuku's performance, while Awase praised Jairu's drumming skills. Setsuna suggested they should form a band together, and Mina enthusiastically agreed. Katsuki scoffed, urging the others to pay attention as the performance continued, while Kirishima cheered in support. A heavy, driving guitar riff starts, followed by a powerful drum beat. The crowd roars as Izuku returns to the microphone, shaking his head wildly with the beat and swaying with the music. Shoji observes that he doubts they would ever see Midoriya act so wildly in their universe. Shoto agrees, finding this side of him refreshing in a way. With raw emotion, Izuku sings about feeling sick of it all, his voice filled with anger. Kodai comments on how Tsunatori seems to be having a lot of fun. Tsunatori expresses his enjoyment of playing the guitar in a band, something he never expected to do. Shiojaki praises his wonderful sound, and Tsunatori thanks him. Izuku urges the crowd to sing along, and they repeat his words enthusiastically. As the band kicks in with a heavy groove, he sings about trying but feeling like the world is getting darker, capturing the frustration of failure. Acknowledges that this is definitely Izuku. The lyrics reflect on empty promises and the struggle to take control, resonating with many in the crowd, including some villains who raise their hands. Aizawa, despite his usual demeanor, raises his hand too, explaining to Hisashi that he doesn't get paid enough for all the responsibilities at UA. Hisashi can only facepalm in response. Izuku jumps in the air, urging the crowd to raise their hands as they sing along, their voices echoing through the stadium. The theater guests join in, creating a lively atmosphere. Izuku's fast-paced DLVY synchronizes with the rhythm, expressing his feelings of being trapped and running out of time. Mina taps her foot excitedly, wishing to dance to the song, while Izuku's voice conveys his frustration and desire for change. The band delivers a powerful punch, and the crowd begins to catch on, raising their fists in the air. Eri and Koda jump in their seats, cheering along with the crowd. As Izuku sings about feeling tired and bored, the band transitions to a more melodic section, creating an uplifting atmosphere. He engages the crowd, asking how they are feeling, and they respond with enthusiasm. Izuku expresses his appreciation for the audience, noting how beautiful they are. The crowd's cheer grows louder as he introduces the band, Skillet. Tsuyu comments on his newfound confidence, contrasting it with his previous demeanor as a villain. Pixie Bob playfully requests a hug, but Izuku tries to shy away, feeling it might not be a good idea. Mandalay intervenes, playfully reprimanding Pixie Bob. Izuku acknowledges that everyone has something they are sick of, whether it be violence, loneliness, or other struggles. The crowd responds with cheers as they share their frustrations, each person raising their hands to signify what they want to let go of together. The crowd erupted with energy as they joined Izuku in a lively chant, raising their hands in unison. The theater resonated with the infectious lyrics, and many guests stood up, fully immersed in the performance. Izuku knelt at the front of the stage, encouraging everyone to participate, and the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. As he stood up, the crowd echoed his call, their voices blending together in a powerful chorus. The villains cheered alongside the heroes, creating a vibrant tapestry of sound. Izuku moved back to the center, his enthusiasm contagious as he jumped with joy, urging everyone to join in once more. The theater responded with an enthusiastic roar, the energy palpable. As the song continued, the audience was swept up in the rhythm, their voices rising in a collective expression of frustration and hope. They sang about being tired of their struggles, yearning for change, and taking a stand together. When the song reached its conclusion, a quieter wave of applause filled the theater, and Izuku beamed at the crowd, clapping his hands in appreciation. Class 1A and 1B cheered, praising the band for their incredible performance. The Wild Wild Pussycats chimed in, expressing their admiration for the powerful voices and melodies. Jairu turned to Pony, suggesting a collaboration, and Tsunatori eagerly accepted. Setsuna and Mina, inspired by the music, excitedly discussed creating a dance routine together, their enthusiasm infectious. Mina wrapped her arm around Setsuna, declaring their partnership in this creative endeavor. Denki, feeling a bit left out, wondered why he hadn't been invited to join. Shoji offered a comforting pat on the back, while Awaze reminded everyone that the next song was about to start. The theater buzzed with anticipation as the next performance began, ready to embrace the energy once more. For the next song, a powerful, driving guitar riff started, building anticipation as Jairu came down to the front with a microphone in hand and a bright smile on her face. Ochako squealed in excitement, urging Jairu to look at the crowd. Jairu, still smiling, reassured her that she could see everything from the front of the stage. Izuku roared at the audience, encouraging them to respond with a loud cheer. Together, Izuku and Jairu launched into a chorus, jumping in rhythm with the music. The theater buzzed with energy as Eri and Kota jumped from their seats, joining in the excitement. The crowd roared as they recognized the melody. Izuku took a deep breath, his voice filled with passion as he sang about being just a step away from losing his faith. Jairu stood beside him, her voice harmonizing beautifully. The intensity of the song resonated with Katsuki, who noted that it matched the way he trained. Just as everyone settled in for the next verse, the lights suddenly went out. Nijire exclaimed in surprise at the darkness, while Tokoyami remarked on the revelry in the dark. Izuku wondered what had happened, and Mei excitedly announced that she had just the thing to help. After a few moments of small noises from her corner, a light shone from Mei, illuminating the theater. Lilith stood up, expressing her frustration about the interruption, revealing that she had anticipated the issue. Aizawa questioned what they should do next, and Mei waved around a large device, eager to fix the problem. Lilith, filled with panic at the thought of anyone tampering with her settings, asked for a moment to resolve the issue. After a brief absence, Lilith returned, explaining that the server was down, and they would not be able to watch Izuku's verses anymore. Mina inquired about what that meant, and Momo confirmed that it meant they wouldn't see Midoriya's performances. Lilith suggested an alternative, watching their own verses, which excited everyone, including some of the villains. Nizu observed the situation, curious about the revelations that might come to light. Kirishima expressed his enthusiasm, while Tsuyu noted that they should prepare for some secrets to be revealed. Setsuna playfully encouraged everyone to share any hidden truths. Lilith called for order, and everyone settled down, ready to watch the multiverses with palpable excitement. As the screen lit up again, a room resembling an interrogation chamber came into view. It was unsettling, with someone restrained in a chair, surrounded by various unrecognizable tools. All for One commented on the grim setting, while Aizawa worried about the implications of what they might witness. The restrained individual had damp, shoulder-length blonde hair matted with blood, slumped in the chair, held upright by thick chains. His shirtless torso displayed numerous scars, and as he shifted his striking red eyes opened, revealing a sense of boredom that shocked the audience. Kirishima recognized him as Bakugo, while Izuku sighed, knowing trouble would find him eventually. Setsuna commented on Bakugo's impressive physique, and Katsuki, confused by the scene, pointed out that he did not have any tattoos. Everyone's attention was drawn to two distinct tattoos on Bakugo's body, one depicting a kitsune, a mythical fox from Japanese legends, and the other a dark symbol representing the god of death. All for One found the tattoos intriguing, explaining that the second one was a Yakuza symbol, marking the leader of a clan. The revelation left the heroes and villains in shock, and Katsuki struggled to comprehend the implications of his counterpart's markings. All for One elaborated on the significance of such tattoos, emphasizing their role in establishing authority and instilling fear. The audience absorbed the weight of the moment, realizing the depth of the alternate reality they were witnessing. One hero after all. Lilith took a deep breath of relief, thankful that he had dropped the topic. She thought about how difficult it would have been to explain a certain ship to him. She decided to start the next verse before he realized she hadn't answered his question at all. She announced that it was time for the next verse, and the excitement in the room grew. Izuku wondered who they would see this time, while Momo expressed her belief that it would be an enjoyable experience. Shoto contemplated the design of the city they were about to see, and Siro shared his enthusiasm for the fun they were having. Mina jumped up, eager to move on to the next verse. The screen brightened to reveal an enchanting view where land met the sea. A city suspended in the sky sparkled with gold and silver, its towering spires and buildings adorned with precious stones and metals. The streets were paved with gold, and the sky was a vibrant tapestry of colors. Kendo exclaimed how beautiful it was, and Izuku leaned forward in his seat, marveling at the colors and likening it to a quirk-powered paradise. Shoto found the city's design intriguing, while Momo marveled at the resources needed to create such a place. Kaminari speculated about the wealth required to build it, and Shinso, arms crossed, expressed skepticism about its durability during disasters. Tetsutetsu grinned, eager to see the strong villains that must inhabit such a place. A woman dressed in a black bodysuit with green highlights and a flowing cape stood confidently on a raised platform, examining her nails. Lilith noted that Tetsutetsu was getting what he asked for, though she doubted the woman would go all out. Izuku was surprised to learn she was a villain, while Mina complimented Momo on how badass she looked in that suit. The woman addressed the crowd, revealing her identity. Momo found the situation interesting, and Ochako laughed, noting how much it resembled Momo's personality. Toru remarked that it would indeed be their vice president if she were a bit more confident. The screen shifted to show the shimmering city, now filled with soldiers prepared for battle, their weapons raised. Katsuki was taken aback by the sight of a real army, while Hatsum jumped to the front, excitedly speculating about the aerial battleships above. Power Loader sighed, pulling her back and reminding her that she couldn't recreate such technology until after graduation. Hatsum insisted she could make something even better, but Power Loader stood firm in his decision. Lilith encouraged Hatsum to focus on the verse, and she agreed, determined to learn more about how the technology worked. The woman introduced herself as Hela, Odin's firstborn and commander of the legions of Asgard. The soldiers took fighting positions, kneeling with their spears pointed at her. Kirishima marveled at Momo's transformation into a literal goddess, while Ochako found it exciting. Ida expressed concern for Momo's safety, doubting she could fend off so many soldiers. Sato pointed out that the soldiers were equivalent to their military. Compress noted that in the past, soldiers like those were referred to as knights. Hela continued, declaring her father and brothers dead, and her intention to restore their power. Izuku realized this was a struggle for the throne, while Katsuki confirmed that her title as firstborn indicated she was claiming something significant. Jiro explained that Momo's counterpart had killed her family for the throne and was now facing soldiers loyal to the previous king. Lilith acknowledged Jiro's insight. Hela proclaimed that they were once the seat of absolute power in the cosmos and that their destiny was to rule above all. She invited the soldiers to kneel before her and join her conquest. Kendo remarked on Momo's role as a tyrant in this verse, to which Momo responded that she found it hard to believe she would actively pursue war. Lilith dismissed the accusation, suggesting Odin was a poor father. The enemy commander warned Hela to surrender or face consequences. Hela, offended, questioned if he had listened to her declaration. Kaminari burst out laughing, and Dobby chuckled at the exchange. The commander issued one last warning, and Rico predicted a full-fledged war. Spinner doubted Hela could win against such overwhelming odds, while Stain cautioned against underestimating an opponent. The woman declared herself the commander of the army, a title she earned as the goddess of death. Her opponents were giving their all to stop her, fully aware that they stood little chance otherwise. Lilith observed the scene and noted that, despite their efforts, they were unlikely to succeed. Hela, momentarily dejected, had hoped for a warmer welcome. She lifted her head, her eyes glowing with power. Lilith explained to the others that Hela's sadness stemmed from being locked away by Odin for centuries. Momo was shocked to learn this, while Awais questioned whether it was a good thing. Lilith countered, emphasizing that Hela's upbringing in a world of conquest and violence shaped her into who she was. She urged them not to blame a child for the mistakes of a parent. Awais looked away, feeling uncomfortable as the heroes contemplated Lilith's words. Was Hela truly innocent? Yet, her past could not excuse her actions. As the battle commenced, a man prepared his weapons, spikes protruding from his flail. Midnight rallied the troops, urging them to face Hela together. Aizawa sighed at his colleagues' enthusiasm, while Hela, resigned, transformed her hair into a fearsome black headdress, signaling the start of the conflict. The man charged at Hela, swinging his flail. In response, she conjured pitch-black blades and launched them at him. He deflected each one, closing the distance between them. Hela tilted her head aside as he swung at her, remaining unharmed. With a powerful kick, she sent him flying over the railing of the platform. Izuku marveled at her abilities, realizing that her quirk was also one of creation. Momo disagreed, stating that their powers were not the same, though they shared similarities. Spinner acknowledged Hela's strength, noting how she had taken the flail without injury. Hela turned her attention to the advancing army, summoning a long black blade from her palms as she descended the stairs. The soldiers charged at her, their war cries echoing, but none could harm her. With swift movements, Hela swung her sword, taking down multiple soldiers in an instant. She launched herself into the air, landing gracefully and dispatching another soldier before her feet touched the ground. Aizawa watched in disbelief as she eliminated dozens in mere moments. Momo reflected on her own abilities, realizing that Hela's agility and speed far surpassed her own. Izuku nodded in agreement, recognizing that Hela's ability to conjure blades rapidly would give her a significant advantage in battle. Toga expressed her admiration for Hela's ferocity, captivated by the chaos she unleashed. The black blades flew from Hela's body, striking down soldiers with relentless precision. As she soared across the battlefield, bodies fell in her wake, and the aerial boats above exploded under the force of her attacks. Momo marveled at the power behind Hela's blades, while Kendo noted the massacre unfolding before them. Ashui wondered if the army could truly stop her, remarking on Hela's resemblance to a goddess of death. Hatsum rushed to the front, eager to observe the destruction, while Katsuki growled in annoyance at her distraction. Soldiers surrounded Hela, their weapons glinting in the sunlight, but she remained unfazed. With confidence, she twirled among them, effortlessly dispatching anyone who approached. Stain acknowledged her skill, while Izuku noted the aura of death that surrounded her. As the aerial boats opened fire, Hela crouched under her cloak, momentarily pausing as bullets rained down. But she quickly retaliated, launching large blades that pierced through the boats, causing them to explode in fiery chaos. Hatsum eagerly took notes, determined to uncover Hela's secrets. Momo questioned the nature of Hela's blades, wondering what material could withstand such force. Shoji suggested it was pure physical strength, while Sato pointed out her slender frame. Lilith rolled her eyes, reminding them that Hela was a goddess and an Asgardian, inherently stronger than any human. Kirishima found her strength admirable. Hela continued her assault, twirling and striking with deadly precision. Soldiers fell before her, their ranks dwindling. Ashui remarked on the one-sided nature of the battle, and Izuku agreed, noting that Hela showed no mercy. One soldier managed to catch Hela off guard, stabbing her from behind. Yet she did not cry out in pain. Instead, she swiftly retaliated, elbowing her attacker and using a dagger to end him. Kaibara was astonished by her resilience, while Tokoyami observed that she had embraced the darkness within her. Spinner cheered for Hela's ferocity, eager to witness more of her power. She was a force to be reckoned with. Another figure rushed toward her, the last remaining soldier, his weapon raised in a desperate attempt to stop the goddess of death. Hela twirled gracefully, her dagger finding its mark with a swift motion that brought her to one knee as the soldier fell, lifeless. Toga watched in awe, her excitement palpable as she admired the fluidity of the kill. Midnight, however, expressed concern, believing that strength without empathy could lead to a dark path. Cementos shared her worry, feeling that it might already be too late for Hela. Silence enveloped the scene as Hela reveled in her actions, opening her arms wide as if the chaos around her was a performance. Another man approached her cautiously, his steps hesitant as he took in the sight of the fallen soldiers. Momo stifled a gasp, horrified by Hela's enjoyment of the carnage. Ochako felt the weight of the situation, questioning how anyone could find pleasure in such brutality. Stain scoffed at the heroes, calling them hypocrites for their outrage. Mina protested, insisting that taking joy in killing was wrong. Dobby rolled his eyes, pointing out that Hela had been wronged by her own family and had every right to be angry. Compress interjected, arguing that Hela had shown mercy by not enacting revenge on the innocent kingdom. He challenged the heroes, reminding them that the soldiers had drawn their weapons first, suggesting that Hela's actions were a form of self-defense. Momo frowned, struggling to reconcile the concept of self-defense with the joy Hela took in violence. Izuku echoed her sentiments, emphasizing that there was a line that should not be crossed. Aizawa acknowledged Hela's pain but cautioned that her rampage would only create more enemies. All for One leaned in, intrigued by the debate, questioning the hero's understanding of justice. Mina insisted that being humane was the point of being a hero, while All for One smiled, finding amusement in their convictions. Nizu sipped his tea, remarking that only time would reveal the truth of their ideals. Hela continued to survey the battlefield, lamenting the loss of good soldiers who had failed to foresee their fate. Suddenly, one soldier rose on shaky legs, still fighting against the odds. Denki's enthusiasm faltered as Spinner pointed out the futility of the situation. The soldier, filled with hatred, defiantly challenged Hela. She responded with a casual demeanor, amused by his bravery. Hound Dog noted that while the soldier was courageous, he was ultimately outmatched. Tamura observed the fire in the soldier's eyes, anticipating the outcome with excitement. Hela, unfazed by the provocation, swiftly dispatched him with a spike before turning to the other man who had followed her. She walked confidently, never glancing back at the bloodshed left in her wake. The battle had been swift, and the goddess of death had lived up to her name. As the screen faded to black, the heroes reflected on the events that had unfolded. Izuku remarked on the experience, while Momo expressed her disapproval of Hela's actions. Shizuki emphasized the importance of acknowledging the suffering of others, asserting that true strength lies in mercy. Komori agreed, her voice trembling with emotion as she lamented the pain caused by those who revel in violence. Midnight encouraged her students to resist being consumed by darkness, reminding them that their fight was to protect, not destroy. Aizawa reinforced the importance of remembering their goals as heroes, grounding them in reality. Momo acknowledged their lessons, determined to uphold the values they stood for. A little something for you guys. Chapter end. Previously, Aizawa nodded in agreement, reminding his students to always remember their goal and the reason they wanted to be heroes, as that would keep them grounded in reality. Momo acknowledged his words with understanding. Jairu raised her eyebrows, expressing her intrigue about Yamamo's verse, noting how they had witnessed a dimension with gods. Lilith shrugged, explaining that gods existed in almost every realm, though their involvement in human affairs varied. Tokoyami added that the Dark Lords did not appreciate the light, while Tetsu enthusiastically remarked on Yamamo's strength in battle. Kirishima agreed, praising her for bravely taking on hundreds of soldiers alone. Aizawa expressed excitement for the next verse, curious about what they would see. Mina urged Lilith to pull up the next verse, and Lilith chuckled at the students' enthusiasm as she used her remote to start it. The screen lit up to reveal a bright room with warm-colored walls adorned with drawings. Toys were scattered about, and a single bed occupied the space. On that bed lay a child with white hair, motionless and connected to N4. As he blinked slowly, confusion filled his turquoise eyes. Ray gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in surprise, recognizing the child as Tuya. Dobby looked at Lilith with displeasure, suspecting that this was intentional. Lilith denied it, claiming she had no idea what was coming and suggested that Dobby should accept the spotlight for once. Dobby threatened her, vowing to burn her to ashes someday, to which Lilith responded with a smirk, inviting him to try. As Dobby felt the four tug at his hand, he glanced around the room, his confusion shifting to slight panic. Ochako was shocked to see Dobby as a child, noting that his scars were not as dark yet. Toga, excited, commented on how cute Dobby had been as a kid, prompting him to threaten her in return. Toga playfully dodged Dobby's swing, laughing as she danced away. Denki shook his head in disbelief, realizing that one of the most dangerous villains had once looked so innocent. Dobby scoffed, challenging Denki's naive perspective on villainy. Dobby ripped the four from his hand and got out of bed, stumbling as he tried to walk. He steadied himself against the side table, took a deep breath, and successfully walked out of the room. The hallway mirrored the room's design, with warm-colored walls covered in children's drawings. Fuyumi narrowed her eyes at Dobby, demanding to know when this had happened. Dobby sighed in defeat, admitting it was the first time he woke up after nearly dying. Natsuo reminded him that he was 13 when the forest caught fire, to which Dobby confirmed. He opened the door to a room filled with voices and stopped in his tracks, eyes widening at the sight. Inside were over a dozen children, all under 15, engaged in various activities like playing, drawing, and chatting. One child noticed him and skipped over, excitedly announcing that the sleepyhead was finally awake. Another girl ran to shout through the other door that Mr. Sunny needed to know. Present Mike speculated that it was an orphanage, and Eraserhead agreed. Ray was astonished that an orphanage had saved Dobby, but Dobby scoffed, insisting it was not as moral as it appeared, describing the place as one of the shadiest he had ever seen. Tsukichi, eager for details, pulled out his notepad, but Dobby rolled his eyes, stating that the orphanage had burned down long ago. Tuya, confused, asked where he was, surprised by the sound of his own voice. Ochako remarked that he sounded less threatening, making it hard to imagine he was the same person who constantly tried to harm them. Dobby pointed out that he was right there, questioning the third-person talk. Ochako ignored him, turning to her friend Azui, who agreed that it was strange to see such a fearsome villain as a defenseless child. Kirishima likened it to seeing Midoriya become a villain, but in reverse, leaving Dobby incredulous. Toga laughed, jumping in her seat, and attempted to pet Dobby's head, but he swatted her hand away, familiar with her antics. The first girl approached him again, excitedly explaining that this was their home and that he had slept for 3 whole years, as Mr. Sunny had said. Eraserhead concluded that Mr. Sunny was likely the caretaker of the orphanage. Niza pondered how an orphanage could have access to the medical equipment necessary to treat Dobby's injuries and a skilled doctor for such recovery. All eyes turned to Dobby for answers, but he could only shrug in response, expressing his uncertainty. Dobby questioned how he could possibly know the details. Chapter end. Tuya's eyes widened in disbelief as he processed the information. 3 years had passed, and he struggled to understand how it had happened. He remembered burning at Sokoto Peak, but the details were hazy. Eraserhead observed the scene, noting the panic in the young boy's demeanor. Dobby, standing nearby, scoffed, clearly uninterested in any sympathy offered. Eraserhead shook his head, his attention fixed on the screen where a child, the same age as his students, was visibly distressed. Tuya insisted he needed to go home, glaring at the man who had just entered the room. The man had a cheerful demeanor, with a face resembling a yellow sunflower. Denki expressed surprise, questioning why Dobby hadn't caused chaos immediately. Dobby rolled his eyes, dismissing the notion. The caretaker gently guided Tuya to another room, insisting that he would be living there with everyone else now. The heroes exchanged concerned glances, puzzled by the orphanage's decision to keep a child who already had a family. Tuya stepped back, confusion evident on his face. He questioned the older man's actions, clearly disturbed by the situation. The caretaker continued without hesitation, assuring Tuya that this was his new family and that he would soon feel at home. Momo turned to Eraserhead, her eyes wide with concern, questioning the appropriateness of the situation. Eraserhead crossed his arms, his expression grim, confirming that it was not right. Midnight added that forcing someone to stay where they didn't want to be was never acceptable. Tuya protested, insisting that he needed to return home. He believed his father was simply busy with work and would be worried about him. Desperation filled his voice as he expressed his need to apologize to his mother and show his father what he could do, declaring his aspiration to become a hero. Ray watched with tears in her eyes, feeling the weight of her son's distress. Fuyumi looked at Dobby, realization dawning on her that he had wanted to return. Dobby avoided her gaze, acknowledging her unspoken question. Suddenly, a different voice echoed from the television, cutting through the tension. It informed them that Tuya's body had suffered severe damage and that he was now unrecognizable. The voice explained that despite the extensive repairs, he had survived. Nizu confirmed his suspicions about the situation. Tamura, confused by the television, turned to All for One, but was silenced by a gentle gesture from his mentor. Tamura marveled at All for One's planning, wondering how he had orchestrated such a complex scheme involving the number 2 hero's eldest son. With each revelation, Tuya took a step back, his hands trembling as he touched his face, struggling to comprehend the changes. The voice continued, explaining that he could no longer use his powers as he once did, detailing the damage to his body and senses. Recovery Girl expressed her sympathy for the boy, recognizing the emotional toll of his situation. Dobby felt a twitch of annoyance at the pity in her voice but remained silent, aware of her abilities. The voice continued, disregarding Tuya's turmoil, offering a false sense of comfort. It suggested that they could help restore his flames if he joined their family and learned alongside them. Tuya's eyes filled with fear as he bent down, overwhelmed by emotion. The television's mock sympathy only deepened his despair, leaving him to grapple with the reality of his situation. Aizawa expressed his disbelief at the blatant manipulation of a clearly traumatized child. Tuya stopped shaking, his eyes gleaming with intensity as he quietly told Aizawa to be quiet, lowering his hands from his face. A cheer erupted from Toga, urging Dobby to take action. Tuya's hands fell further, and he glared at the television, declaring that he did not want to learn from anyone else. The only one who could teach him was his father. In a fit of anger, he threw a keyboard at the TV, his frustration boiling over. Midnight commented on the unhealthy fixation that Tuya had developed. Dobby scoffed, pointing out that it was not his fault. The heroes exchanged glances, all eyes landing on Endeavor, who scowled. Aizawa appeared ready to take drastic action. Shoto watched the screen intently, captivated by his brother's past, unwilling to miss a single moment. Mr. Sunny attempted to dissuade Tuya, but instead found himself in a struggle with the younger boy. Tuya pushed him back, using his quirk to maintain distance. Panic surged within him as he swung his flaming hand again, demanding silence. Nizu observed the situation, realizing that Tuya was losing control. The flames erupted uncontrollably, and in his frenzied state, Tuya ran from the orphanage, leaving the building engulfed in flames behind him. Toga cheered for Dobby, while Spinner nodded in agreement, expressing relief. Tamura remained silent, reflecting on the facility that his mentor operated. The scene shifted to Tuya standing before his house, filled with hesitation, fear, and anticipation as he gazed at the large entrance doors. He wondered if his father would be worried about him, if his mother and siblings would have been concerned as well. Fuyumi expressed her frustration, hitting Dobby on the shoulder for causing them worry. Dobby protested, reminding her that it wasn't his fault he had been in a coma. Fuyumi insisted that he still made them worry, while Dobby reiterated his earlier apology. Taking a deep breath, Tuya stepped forward, then another. He hoped that perhaps things had changed, that his father would finally acknowledge him. He believed he could surpass all might for his father, that his flames were strong enough. His steps quickened as he navigated the corridors, eager to see his family. Rei felt a pang of pain, knowing that Enji had not changed in the vision. She feared for what her son might discover that could lead him down a dark path. Flames flickered in his vision as he entered the training room, coming to an abrupt halt. Tuya's eyes widened in disbelief at the sight of the room ablaze, with Endeavor looming over a young Shoto Todoroki. Confusion and despair overwhelmed him as he questioned why this was still happening, why his father wasn't searching for him, and whether he truly meant nothing to him. The thoughts spiraled, leading him to feel like a failure, unworthy of existence. Mina interrupted, her voice filled with confusion about what she was witnessing. Shoto, in a monotone voice, acknowledged his training. Aizawa seethed, questioning what part of that situation could be considered training, his eyes glowing with intensity, causing Endeavor to step back for the first time. Ray's tears flowed silently as she expressed her sorrow, apologizing for Tuya's pain. Dobby's gaze softened, reassuring her that it was not her fault. The scene shifted once more, revealing Dobby standing before a memorial shelf, hands raised in prayer for Tuya, his turquoise eyes dull and devoid of excitement. A singular thought consumed him. He would make Todoroki Enji pay, burning everything he loved to the ground as proof of his existence. The multiverse came to an end. Toga squealed with excitement, admiring Dobby's anger. Spinner wiped tears from his eyes, reflecting on how their pyromaniac had once been an innocent boy, lamenting the consequences of allowing false heroes to remain. Stain agreed, condemning Endeavor as the worst kind of fake hero deserving of punishment. Shigaraki scoffed at the notion of heroes, declaring that they needed to be completely destroyed. Bakugo retorted, defending his own integrity and distancing himself from Endeavor's actions. Shigaraki narrowed his eyes at Bakugo, a twisted smile forming as he acknowledged the tension. Bakugo growled, expressing his frustration. They were not all like that villain. Some were genuinely trying to make things better. Midoriya clenched his fists, his eyes downcast as he struggled to understand the emergence of a villain. Shoto quietly reflected to himself, acknowledging the return of someone who had witnessed everything. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of the revelation settling in like a thick fog. Lilith sighed and crossed her arms, noting that it was easy to label villains as mere bad guys until one understood what had shaped them. More often than not, it was the upbringing that was to blame. Momo, still pale, questioned the circumstances of the orphanage, wondering who had been in charge and why no one had come for him. Dobby scoffed, revealing that it had never mattered to his father whether he lived or died. He had finally created his masterpiece. Nizu pondered deeply, recognizing the need for investigation. If such facilities still existed, or if there were any remnants left, they needed to be brought to light. Eraserhead stated flatly that it was not just about exposure, it was about holding people accountable. Dobby leaned back, his expression unreadable, suggesting that it might be too late for that. Fuyumi softly countered, expressing hope that it was not too late to make a difference. Toga playfully kicked her feet back and forth on her seat, teasing that the group was getting sentimental. She admitted to preferring the angry version of Dobby but found this side of him endearing as well. Dobby groaned, playfully threatening her. Toga responded with a light-hearted remark about their bond. Dobby dismissed her with annoyance. Toga pouted and grumbled into her seat. Bakugo, with a deadpan expression, warned that he would throw something if she continued her teasing. Denki whispered to Mina, surprisingly admitting that he felt a twinge of sympathy for Dobby. Mina nodded solemnly, reflecting on how Dobby had wanted to return home and become a hero, which changed everything. Lilith clicked the remote again, standing before the screen with a small smile, asking if they were ready for the next segment or if they needed a moment to breathe.